remember your roots and the rules. That was her favorite saying. Before I got married, then moved out the rest into the city. I remember my grandma telling me during my wedding, which was the last time we spoke, she said, "No matter where you go, sweetie, always respect the traditions. Remember your roots and the rules." And, well, one of the rules that she told me, the one that I forgot and let it slip out of my head, was, whatever you do, never open the door at night if you hear knocking, and never go into a house where someone has died. So the story that I'm going to tell you, it's an experience that I'll never forget. And after seeing what happened, I hope you can learn from my own mistake. So I did keep the traditions and rules in my mind for a long time. And trust me, I stood strong on these beliefs. When me and my husband were house hunting in the city, there were a few houses that we actually liked. But I stood my ground and refused to move into those places because of the background of them, mainly because someone had died there. We eventually did find a house, and after about a decade, with life moving so fast, technology advancing so quick, and everything else going on, my traditional beliefs started to slip away. People do let you down, and life isn't what you expect it to be. I ended up getting divorced and moving back to the res. After I split up with him, he ended up staying in the city. He wasn't actually Navajo. Well, actually he was, but he was born in the city, and so that's where he stayed. I ended up moving back to the res. By this time I had 3 beautiful children. I was lucky and found a house. It was a 2-story house with the master bedroom upstairs and the other 2 rooms downstairs. So it was a pretty big house. I mean, at least for me. I'm sure some of you listening to this might think that's not a big house, but over here in the res, everybody is poor, at least in the area that I was in, including myself. So anyways, I ended up meeting my neighbors, and we started hanging out because they also had kids that were the same age as mine, and we became pretty close. Then one day, randomly, we were hanging out, and my neighbor asked me how I could stay there. I asked her why she was asking that, and she told me that the person who used to live there had died in the house. That's when it clicked as to why she wouldn't come over, and why it was always us going to her place to visit. I did end up asking how the man died, and she said that he drank a lot and died from alcohol. He was the only person who lived in this big house, so no one knew he was dead, and he had apparently been dead for a while, until his family asked for a welfare check. When they found him, his body was decomposing. She asked if anything strange has happened, and I told her no, nothing really. I asked her why she would ask that. She said that a lot of people come and go, but never stay too long there, and that she's also heard stories. I didn't ask because I didn't want to get scared, and she didn't offer to tell me the stories. We just left it at that. So one day it was getting late, and I was getting tired, so we walked back to our place and we were getting ready for bed. That's when I heard a knock on the door. So I went to answer it, and when I opened the door, there was nobody there. This happened a few times. I just thought it was kids playing around. Then one night, it wasn't really nighttime yet, but it was starting to get dark. I heard the same thing. I was too tired to play this game, so I just laid in bed without answering the door. And the next thing you know, somebody was banging their fist on the door, really loud. I got worried, thinking it's an emergency, so I jumped out of bed and ran to the door. It was my friend, and also her husband. They were telling me to get the kids and that I would stay the night with them. I asked them what was going on, and she said, "I'll tell you when you come with us." So I got the kids and a few of our things and left with them. When we got to her place and put the kids to bed, she and her husband sat me down and said that I would stay there with them until I could get someone to smudge and bless the house. I asked why, and she said that they were outside, and they said that they saw the man that had died there come up to the door and walk in. They said they saw the lights upstairs turn on, and he was walking around. I thought they were just trying to scare me, so I went outside to look at my house, and sure enough, the lights were on, and in the distance, it did look like somebody was walking. I told them that I was going to call the police just to make sure it wasn't somebody actually breaking in. They did end up showing up, and I told them what was going on. They ended up going inside to check the house. As I was outside looking, I noticed that the officers stopped right before going in, and they quickly smudged themselves. And that's when it hit me. What my neighbors were telling me was true. See, I watched the house the whole time and never saw anyone leave, so I know the person who was there still had to be in the house. But that's when the officers told me that they went through the whole place and it was empty. Then one of the officers told me that they always got calls like this from the same address. They also advised me to get a medicine man to smudge the entire home and even perform a ceremony if needed, especially since my kids and I had been living inside. I was scared, and I asked my friend if I could stay with them for a few days until I got something figured out. Of course, they said yes. I did end up talking to my family, specifically my mom. Of course, she knew a medicine man, and in the next day towards the evening, the medicine man came out to perform a ceremony out in the field behind the house. He included me and my children in the ceremony. I won't go too much into detail because ceremonies are sacred. However, I will say this, the medicine man also went inside the house. He was in there for a few hours. When he finally came out, he told me something that I will never forget. I had broken two very important rules of the res, the same rules that my grandmother had reminded me of. 1. Never move into a place where someone has died. The spirit, or the chide, still dwells there, while the bad, unclean energy stays in that place, and that's dangerous. And 2, never open the door at night when you hear knocking. If you do, you're inviting spirits inside. It might be something trying to make contact. That was my mistake, one that I will never forget again. This happened a while back. I consider myself a little bit more grown now, going back to my traditions, you can say. My great uncle James, or Jim for short, and my grandpa were best friends since they were little kids. This was mostly on account of them being identical twins and spending nearly every day of their lives together until they were about 18. It was the 50s, and tensions were high in Tucker County after the coal mines that had opened near the surface. After the huge fires in the 1910s had mostly dried up, larger coal companies moved in to take advantage of the area's natural resources and make deeper coal mines. Nobody local could really do this due to the lack of industrial drilling technology. So Jim and my grandpa went to work in one of these new super deep coal mines. Now keep in mind that the Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains on Earth and have existed for 500 million years. They have been more or less undrilled until these large companies came in. It was profitable enough. My grandpa and Jim finally found a steady job, but the mountains themselves didn't seem to like it. Jim tells me it was about 1953 when things started happening. First, it was just a couple of cave-ins, but then everything started dying almost immediately after entering the mines. Birds and small animals around the entrances would just drop dead. Frequently, silicosis cases skyrocketed, but the nation needed coal, and 500 million years worth of compressed carbon-based life could power anything, just about everything at that time. So the mining continued until it couldn't. One day, a big saw that was used to actually obtain the coal was found shattered, broken. This was attributed to a sudden change in temperature. People thought that the fanning system used to circulate the oxygen had malfunctioned. But until the saw was fixed, all the mining had to stop. After 2 weeks, the pay the workers were receiving had also dried up, and my grandpa and Jim decided to take things into their own hands. With 6 other men in tow, they descended into the mine under the disguise that they were mechanics, saying they were mechanics hired to fix the saw. Once they got down to the lowest level, it was chaos. The crow that was brought in, since smaller birds were dying so quickly, crows started going crazy. And not only was the saw broken, The conveyor belts were ripped to shreds. Huge holes were made into the walls, the floor, and the roof of the tunnels, and all the machinery was broken. This couldn't have been attributed to the work of a malfunctioning fan system. Obviously, the party ends up leaving the mine and comes back a day later with pickaxes, guns, and other stuff that could end up being useful in trying to figure out or get rid of whatever was doing this to the equipment. However, on the way down, the elevator got stuck a few feet short of the entrance to the lowest level. Climbing out, the group noticed that the elevator shaft was now blocked off with huge rocks. Nearly all the lights were off and broken, and the equipment was even further mangled. They noticed a set of human-like footprints. The group began to follow them to figure out how these people could have possibly gotten in, when somebody pointed out that their own boots were making much more shadow indentations in the rocky mud. It was at that point when they realized that no common person could have possibly lifted those huge rocks, torn up the conveyor belts, and broken the saw that weighed hundreds of pounds. They also began to notice that there were very large handprints to the side of the tunnel, outside the range of their lamps. Something large and not human was in the mine. They turned back to return to the surface, afraid of whatever was in there with them. But as they ran, the tunnel began to shake, and the four men jumped back as a wall of rocks and gravel fell from the roof, separating them from the two others, plus Jim and my grandpa. One of them had his leg seriously injured under a large rock, and he had to be carried by the other three around to where the other tunnel led to the now blocked off area. In that tunnel, which was longer than most of the others, strip mines led to narrow areas, one of which apparently led out to a crack through which the group could actually get to the trapped man. While entering this tunnel, one of the men became aware of a low rumbling that was gradually increasing in sound. Thinking it was another cave-in, they quickly moved away from the source back towards the elevator, but it seemed to be following them. And just then, something big, wide and hairy bolts around the corner and starts charging at them. The three uninjured men whip out their guns and start firing at it. Seconds later, the thing is dead. It had the thumbs of a human, but that's basically where any features of human ended. It looked more like a huge bear than anything. It had two deformed eyes that took up almost half of its face, and it was clearly some kind of mutated animal because it was covered in bony, almost tumorous-like things. It was at least 10 feet tall. Its canine teeth were too long, almost about a foot long. Its fur was patchy and light gray, and its pupils were red. All of its limbs were long and stocky, and it seemed to rely on its arms as a second pair of legs. My grandpa and Jim, both of them who were hunters, thought that it was incredible to see something like this. Whatever it was, they took its head and one of its arms as a prize to present to the local police station as evidence that the mine could finally be reopened. Over the course of a few hours, the 8 men were all able to get back to the elevator and eventually return to the surface. My grandfather and Jim showed their kill to the state police, who then quickly confiscated it as scientific evidence, which was enough to satisfy them at the time. Remember, they were young and didn't finish high school, so they were pretty much not educated. The only evidence that this thing ever existed is a black and white photo of my grandpa and Jim, grinning like idiots holding some kind of tusk with the misspelled word, behemoth, that was written on the bottom. I'm not sure if people will believe this, but if I were you, I wouldn't go anywhere close to the Appalachian Mountains, the trail, or any small towns around there. You never know what else was down there that has came out to the surface. When my uncle was younger, he used to attend many ceremonies. He was always curious and wanted to learn a lot. If you didn't know, the spirits, or the skinwalkers, depending on what your tribe is, they might be known as a different name. Well, he said that during the ceremonies, that's when they show up the most, especially in ceremonies that are held out in the open. Some of these things are drawn to those gatherings to the energy that is going on when so many people are praying for healing or guidance. He told me that whenever you attend one of the ceremonies, you must be ready for anything. Evil can sneak in, even if everyone has the best intentions. One thing that he stressed over and over was that you should only go to meetings, ceremonies held for people that you know. The tradition teaches us to be careful. If you go to a stranger's meeting, you should always go with a group of people that you trust. You need the help because you never know what might happen. It's really easy for something to go wrong, especially when you're not familiar with anything. And when you're alone, you're even more open for these things to happen. So he said that back then when he was young, he didn't believe in too much of these things. So he was curious, trying to experience as much as he could. That curiosity would get the better of him one night when he said that he attended a meeting he wasn't invited to. It's not that he wasn't invited, he didn't really know anybody there. It was an all-night NAC ceremony out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't know the people there too well but had been encouraged by a friend to join. The ceremony was held in a teepee, and by the time they started, it was pretty much filled up. Before the fire stick was lit, an older woman walked up to the door and asked if she could come in. The family of the patient didn't know who she was, but as it was custom, they went ahead and made room for her. She brought in her gourd box and sat in her spot without much fuss. As the praying began, my uncle noticed that the men next to him started moving around. They started to whisper among themselves about a strange, raw, funky smell coming from the direction of the old woman. It wasn't the smell of sage or mountain tobacco, but it was something else, something that didn't just sit right with them. They were hoping that the smoke from the tobacco would block out the smell, but it just lingered. Despite the discomfort, the service carried on into the night. My uncle was trying to ignore it, focusing instead on the songs and prayers. But as the hours passed, something about the old woman started to seem off. She couldn't sit still. She was just moving her body from side to side. At one point, my uncle said that he saw her leg twist unnaturally, almost like a pretzel. My uncle blinked, thinking that maybe it was the medicine that was affecting him. But then it happened again, and he knew it was the woman. By around 3 in the morning, the singing was going on, and the prayers grew more intense. That's when the old woman started acting really strange. As the roadman began a powerful song, the old woman raised her arm in the air, calling out praises to Jesus and God. But she was doing it in a mocking way, something you don't really hear at one of these ceremonies. Then, she began hopping up and down, no longer looking like the fragile old woman who had entered the teepee. The songs did continue, and as they did, the old woman's behavior became more weird. She started making weird noises, hand movements, and shouting that the devil was outside, laughing, waiting to ruin the family of the patient. Fear swept through the teepee. As she was shouting, the people kept their heads down, praying even more. My uncle then said that the strangest thing happened. The old woman suddenly stood still. She perked up, like she had heard something that no one else could. A few seconds later, the sound of a coyote echoed in the distance. That's when she hopped to her feet, shouting something in a language that no one could understand. Her eyes became wide open, and with a strange gait, she dragged her body out of the teepee. My uncle said that she literally did that. She basically crawled backwards out of the teepee. He then said as soon as she stepped outside that there was a loud whoosh, like something with wings had flown away into the night. Everyone inside was frozen, shaken by what had just happened, and no one dared to even say anything, not until the ceremony was over. My uncle didn't tell me what happened for the rest of the ceremony. He said that he's not allowed to tell me. Well, after that, my uncle said that he learned the lesson the hard way. Never attend a ceremony for people that you don't know, and always be cautious. You never know who or what might show up at the ceremony. Ever since that day, He said he's never gone to a ceremony that he's not familiar with. Always listen to your elders and the rest. Wyatt was on duty that first week when the cinema closed due for the quarantine. You know, the one that we're all dealing with right now. For better or worse, he didn't want to go back for the second week. I guess being paid the minimum to sit around all day doing nothing is worse than sitting around all day serving customers. It makes sense. There's no distractions, so the clock does move slower every minute. Jamie and Patricia, they rotated on the second week. The managers took care of week 3, and I guess I was beneath them because I was assigned week 4. I guess I should be thankful. So many people are without work right now, and I was getting paid to sit on my ass all day. You might be wondering why the hell they were staffing a closed cinema in the first place. Well, welcome to 2020, where we pay 19-year-olds to babysit the concession stands of empty cinemas. On the off chance an Uber Eats order comes through, because apparently somebody couldn't go on another day without a $15 bag of popcorn and a $10 bar of candy. I'm not kidding. Load up the app. They're open for deliveries. It's crazy. I guess the bosses felt guilty because we were given the green light to do whatever we wanted while waiting for the orders to come through. And sometimes they came in very often. I had ignored the text from Wyatt. The text that he sent our group after his week on duty as nothing. A simple, don't go into theater 15, with no explanation as to why it didn't exactly ring any alarm bells. That theater had the gaming setup we ran out to party groups. I figured he had logged into his account and was trying to protect his data. Why don't you come to work and log out if it matters to you so much? So my first day back on the job was freaky. My manager stopped by to show me how to work the hot dog stand. She left about an hour in. I had been at the cinema after closing a few times, so it's not like I wasn't used to a mostly empty building. But it was different without my other co-workers. It was eerie, quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and it was also dark. Half of all the lights were off to conserve electricity. I wasn't sure how many orders to expect, so I spent the first evening just around the large lobby, using my employee pass to play arcade games for free, browsing the internet on my phone, and eating so much fucking popcorn. I was there from 3 to 10 p.m., 7 hours, and I only received one order. Small popcorn, extra butter. Wow, imagine having that much disposable income. I had to clean the machines an hour or so after use, bringing the grand total of work-related tasks accomplished that night to a high number of 2. I definitely earned my paycheck, huh? It really felt like babysitting once the kids have gone to bed and the parents left the junk food. The second night, I felt more comfortable wandering off. I kept the work tablet on me so that I would know when an order came in. I grabbed the newest releases that arrived right before the official shutdown, and I settled into Theater 1 to watch movies all night. We didn't get any orders that evening, so that was great. Someone did call asking if we were open, which, lady, did you not hear the pre-recorded message saying that we were closed at the start of the call? She was like, "Hi, are you open?" And I was like, wham bam, no ma'am. Some people, I swear. The third night, the manager had put a list of things for me to do on the bulletin board. It was spring cleaning kind of shit. Organize the uniforms by size, take inventory, and deep clean the hallways. I cranked up the music on my phone and had myself a cleaning moment. Interrupted once or twice for stuff that people would order. Popcorn, and honestly, I can't wrap my head around this. Nachos and cheese. Who the fuck orders nachos and cheese for delivery? I'm honestly throwing up in my mouth just thinking about it. Moving on. I don't know if the boss expected me to complete this with a few shifts, but I finished them all in one night. Nothing new showed up on the bulletin board, so on the fourth night, I got my gaming on. The glorious Theater 15, with all the latest gaming consoles and a little library of games to play, and I had it all to myself. Have you ever thought about exploring the lands of Hyrule on the big screen? Because, let me tell you, it's the best. Everything was fine at first, but after maybe half an hour, I started getting this weird creepy crawling feeling over my shoulders. That I'm feeling watched feeling. You know, I knew I was alone, so it was completely irrational. But I couldn't shake it no matter how hard I tried. I had to get up and move to the last row so that I would have the wall behind me. It helped a lot, but that feeling never left. And then, the blood moon started rising in the game, and I was like, yep, fuck this. I closed the game and went for a little power walk to shake off the oogie boogies. That flippin' blood moon music, man, why is it so eerie? I went back after a bit and put on everyone's favorite red and blue plumber, because there's nothing creepy about that. It was fine. Everything was fine. Nothing weird was happening. And suddenly, that feeling came back. I swept the room, and my stomach dropped when I saw someone sitting in the front row. I went through a roller coaster of instant panic. Like, holy shit, who is that? Oh, it must be the manager. Wait, no, the manager would call first. Tense. I paused around for my flashlight, eyes locked on this person. I aimed it right at them. The seat was empty. I didn't see the movement of someone ducking down or anything. The seat was just empty. I panned the light around and it was still empty. Nothing. I had to walk down there and check row by row just to make sure. I convinced myself it was a shadow. Maybe a bug on the projector. But at that point, I was done with this for the night. I put the things away and headed back to the lobby, telling myself everything that I was doing in a sing-song voice, because that's how I cope with my nerves, alright? Just as I arrived, I nearly had a heart attack because the phone rang. I picked up and, "Hi, are you guys open?" The rest of the shift was uneventful, though every now and again, paranoia would hit and I would find myself looking over my shoulder, thinking that one of my coworkers was playing a trick on me. I would then announce what I was doing and where I was going and say, "I know you're watching me," to try and keep them from jumping out at me. But yeah, no, I was okay on the fifth night. I had given myself a good old pep talk. There was nothing weird about Theater 15. Why it got into my head. Everything is fine. There's nothing scary at all. Go play your video games. I got an early order of popcorn, so there was plenty left over for me to take into Theater 15. I chewed very loud and bravely announced to the room that I wasn't afraid and that I was going to have fun this evening. But despite my newfound courage and conviction, I still sat in the very back row. I started exploring Hyrule again. I survived another blood moon. I finished my popcorn. Everything was well. And then, near the last row of the first set of rows, I saw it again. I saw it with my own two eyes. It was on the seat. It was a person. I could see the outline of a male haircut. I could see a neck and shoulders. I could see some movement. Granted, not a lot. I stood up, knocking over my empty bag of popcorn, flashlight out, being right at the chair, and nothing. Not a damn thing. In the distance, I heard the phone ring, and I hurried out of the room without checking every row so I could answer the phone. Another person asking if we were fucking open. Bro, I massaged my temples and paced back and forth in the lobby. It was crazy. Being afraid of a theater room was crazy, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't go back. I left my trash there and I moved to the other side of the building, watching a movie in Theater 1 instead, where I felt nice and safe. There's nothing like the light of day and a good night's sleep. 3 p.m. on my 6th day at work. I showed up bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I headed to Theater 15 to clean up yesterday's mess. I had the lights on too, to see better. Yeah, we'll go with that. I climbed up the stairs all the way to the back of the theater and scooped up my trash into a dustbin. As I turned around to go back down, I swear, I saw someone standing halfway up the middle rows. I did a double take and there was no one there. So I thought, alright buddy, you're losing it. I so badly wanted not to be afraid of that room. You have no idea. Badly enough that I actually went in with the last of the movies I hadn't watched yet. I kept the habit of me talking to myself. Wow, what a great movie I'm sitting here watching in a perfectly normal room. There's no ghost here. Nope, everything is fine and dandy. Idiot. I could hear my voice cracking. I had nothing to prove to anyone. Nothing. So why was I subjecting myself to this situation? If you guessed that things weren't fine and dandy, you're fucking right. At some point while watching the movie, I got that feeling again. My chest got tight, and I started to feel lightheaded. I could sense him there. I didn't even have to look. He was just a handful of rows down from me, and I could smell his rancid breath like something died in my granny's attic. Goosebumps formed on my arms. It wasn't just my imagination. I could see my breath hanging in the air. I shivered as I glued my eyes to the screen, trying not to look as fear paralyzed me. I saw the form from the corner of my eye. It shuffled from one seat to the next, lining himself up as though purposely trying to put himself in my direct line of sight. The lights were on. The movie was playing. I had my hand on my phone. I had every opportunity to run or call for help, but I couldn't. I held my breath as he suddenly seemed to phase into the next row, now only 2, maybe 3 rows away from me. It's hard to tell without looking directly. I try not to make a peep, as if I could go invisible if I was motionless and quiet. When I saw him phase into an even closer row, I fucking lost it. Finally able to move, I threw my popcorn at him and ran down the stairs screaming like a banshee. I don't even know if my popcorn hit anything. I didn't fucking look. I couldn't. I ran back to the lobby, the only place I felt safe, and I called my manager saying someone had broken in. She told me to wait outside and said she was on her way. She and another manager got there, and we swept the building room by room. But no one was there. No fucking shit. It was a damn ghost. Not that I was gonna tell them that. She actually had the nerve to ask me if I could still come in the next day. Can you believe that? I said no, and she offered to review the security cameras. For some reason, that actually made me feel a little bit better. We looked at the tapes and confirmed no one had come in or out of that room. We went through a whole week's worth of video just to be sure. By the way, there's no video of the room itself. The studios don't allow it, even if the cameras aren't aimed at the screens. She said she would get someone else to come after tomorrow, but she needed me one last night. She said she couldn't get anyone else on short notice. Blah blah blah. Alright, as long as I don't go into that room, I should be fine. On the last night, I was a nervous wreck. Every shadow made me flinch. Every stupid arcade game coming to life gave me a heart attack. Every first pop of the popcorn made me think I was gonna die. I didn't go into a single room, not number 15, not any of them. I was like a tiger in a cage, pacing around, watching and just waiting. I also didn't get a single order come in. I felt like I was wasting my time. The hours were so long. Then, around 8 o'clock, the phone rang. I wanted to scream at this fucking idiot who couldn't get this damn message that we're in a fucking pandemic and the cinema is fucking closed. AMC Cinema, how can I help you? I said through gritted teeth. I heard breathing, slow and shallow. It lasted for a few long uncomfortable seconds before the voice of an old man spoke. What's playing? In Theater 15. I know it must have come from the phone. I had the receiver up against my ear after all. But I fucking swear, I heard the voice behind me. I left then and there. Fuck this shift. Fuck my replacement. I left the machine with popcorn still in it. I didn't even tell anyone I was going. I just left. Corporate did send an email out. Because of staffing issues, our cinema is going to close from now on. This happened about 2 years ago. I remember it was late, around 11 p.m., when I decided to call up an old friend that I hadn't spoken to in a while. I dialed her number, but when someone picked up, it wasn't her. Instead, a lady with a strong southern accent answered. I asked for my friend. and she told me that she didn't know anyone by that name and that she had just recently gotten this number. We started talking. Crazy, huh? Just small talk at first. And she was actually really friendly. I asked where she was from, and she told me she had moved from Tennessee to Rama, New Mexico, where she worked as a teacher. As we kept talking, I just started teasing her, asking her if she had seen any skinwalkers out there. You know, just joking around. But then, in a serious voice, she said, "Is that what they are?" That threw me off. I was like, "What do you mean by that?" She told me the story that gave me chills. She said she lived in a mobile home, one of those that sits a little high off the ground, and one night she got up to use the bathroom. She didn't bother turning on the light because, why would you? Anyways, she's sitting there when she starts hearing this noise outside, right near the bathroom window. She looked over towards the sound, and there, in the window, was the shadow of a man. At first, she thought it was just someone snooping around, but as she stared at it, the shadow started changing. She said she watched as the face began to stretch, growing a long snout like a dog, and its ears got longer too. She told me this thing must have been at least 7 or 9 feet tall, easily towering over the window. She said that the worst part was that she felt frozen in place, like she couldn't move. She said it was almost like she was under some kind of spell that was controlling her. Finally, after what felt like forever, the shadow disappeared, and as soon as it was gone, she could move again. She ended up running straight to the bedroom, freaking out and hiding underneath the covers, telling herself that it was just a nightmare. After that night, she kept hearing things outside. She was able to get one of her teacher friends to come spend a few days with her, just so that she could feel more safe. Of course, her friend didn't believe her, saying that it was most likely just a bad dream, but she knew what she saw. After that, she kept hearing things outside the night, but she wasn't telling her friend anything until one night she experienced something weird too, and that's when she finally believed her. Before we got off the phone, she asked me how to get rid of it. I told her to go up to the mountain, find some clean cedar, dry it out, and burn it, or better yet, ignore that, and find a native friend who could ask a medicine man to bless her, and her friend as well. She told me that she had never seen anything like that before in her life. And right before we hung up on the phone, she said something like, "We're gonna finish our teaching contracts and get out of here, and move back to the city." I'm not sure if they ever did leave. I forgot about the whole thing for a while, but for some reason, it's been on my mind again. "4 years ago, I was married to a man who was more of a monster than a loving husband. One night, he had been drinking and started an argument with me. I tried calling my mom, but he tore the phone out of the wall. Crying, I packed up a small bag and decided to walk the 1/4 of a mile to his parents' house, with every intention to make that phone call. It was pitch black, and there wasn't a moon, so it was extremely dark. We lived in a small village on the rest between Upper and Lower Red Lake. There is very little traffic normally, but at night it becomes completely empty. I stumbled down the driveway and made it to the pavement. It was very quiet, and I quickly felt like someone was watching me. I continued on my way, walking as quickly as I could for some odd reason. As soon as my feet started to move, the underbrush in the ditch came alive. I heard twigs snapping and leaves crunching. I stopped and so did the noise. I looked around but could only see darkness and shadows. I slowly started walking again, and so did the noises, the faster I walked. Whatever it was though, scared the shit out of me, but not bad enough to turn around. I was almost to my in-laws and could see their yard light. The noises in the ditch was right along beside me, and now I could make out the lower brush moving towards me. I froze in fear. Right then, I heard my old man's car and saw the headlights coming my way. That's when I noticed that the weeds in the ditch stopped moving as my husband's car pulled up behind me. I stood there staring into the darkness. That was most likely the only time I was ever happy to see him. I never told anyone this story, but I do know that on that side of the road, drivers have said that they see little people crossing the road right between our house and his parents' house. Maybe it was a group of little people. Maybe they heard me and my husband arguing and decided to be nosy. Or maybe they were wondering who's dumb enough to walk around in pitch black. Some people from different tribes have told me that the little people there are actually good. But if that was the case here, then he should have jumped in the car and beat his ass to see if he liked it. I've seen so much in my life that I'm beginning to believe that there are things out there that we don't know about, and darkness is the perfect cover. My husband did tell me around the time when I was still there that he found a tiny skull outside of our house a while back, and people in the rest have said that they seen him crossing the road back by the shore, and if you hike a little bit, you will find tiny steps going up the hill where they do their ceremonies. A long time ago, I was living in the boonies alone. I decided to chop some wood for the night. Every time that I swung the axe, I heard a whistle, so I would stop and look around. This went on for maybe about one load of a wheelbarrow before I chose to quit. I was getting this creepy feeling. I built my fire and stood at the window looking out into the woods wondering who was lurking around. So as I'm standing, I hear the whistle again. Except this time, it's very close. I steady my breathing. I stay quiet for a few seconds. It turns out, my nose was whistling at me. When I was 20, I was out of a job and didn't have any university or plans on going to one. I was basically lost in limbo without knowing where to turn next. I was living at home and spent hours on the internet staying up all night and sleeping all day. Do you know what that's like? Well, I always been a bit of an introvert that preferred the company of me, myself, and I. Staying up through the night and ignoring the day was a way out of the norm, and avoiding people altogether at that. Then I got the classic talk from my dad. The one that all kids get when they're being useless sitting at home and doing nothing. I was tired of hearing it, so I decided to move out and continue my antisocial behavior. And I have a family way up north in the sticks. There's nothing around except a couple of sawmills and a couple of nickel mines. My grandfather has a piece of property that is over 350 acres of unexplored land. Just a big section of the woods, streams, ponds, and rocks. My grandfather has a timeshare in Florida, so he was gone for the rest of the year. I called him and asked if I could go up there to live. In exchange, I would do some lumberjacking for wood to sell and use. I remember his comments exactly. Yeah, I don't really give a fuck. You're wasting your time up there. No work, no school, no people, no internet. But if that's what you want, go ahead and knock yourself out. Just don't burn down my fucking house. By this point, my bags were already packed. I knew he wouldn't mind. I told Dad what I was doing, and he was pretty much speechless, and he also had a look of concern. He then told me I was wasting my life when I should just go to school. I told him that this is what I wanted, and that I needed to do it at this point in time. So I got into my '93 Civic hatchback that had a short suspension and bald tires, and took the 14-hour car ride into no man's land. I made myself good and comfy when I eventually got to the house. It was given to my grandfather by an Irishman that had passed on. He built the house when he was very young, with his young family around the 1800s, and it had just been there ever since, and then he passed it to my grandfather. If you ever seen the Amityville Horror, it looks just like that house, but a little bit smaller. And it also had an old stove in it that was this old black cast iron beast. And if you can remember using those, you might be as old as I am. It was the kind that you wouldn't really see in a house anymore. It was something like you would see in the movies or like an old historic village tour. There was a large barn full of tools and an old John Deere tractor. There was a smokehouse for meats. There was a large veggie garden. And there was an outhouse and a chicken coop that wasn't really in use anymore. After unpacking and relaxing, the distance and the fact that I was alone began to set in. There wasn't TV, internet, or a video game in sight. My grandfather had 2 snowmobiles, a 4-wheeler, a gator, and a dirt bike, and lots of hunting rifles and shotguns. I figured most of my time would be spent outdoors anyway, which was fine, but I was a little bit nervous. The next day, I drove into town, if you could really even call it that. I stocked up on canned goods and cupboard foods that could survive a nuclear holocaust. I came back and got to lumberjacking. It was slow at first to remember the stuff that my grandpa had shown me as a kid, when I was around 8 to 12 years old. But after about 4 or 5 hours, I kinda was starting to get it again. I would take the tractor, chains and hooks and a jerry can and chainsaw into the bush. I would find a cedar or a spruce tree and cut it down. I would then chain it up to the tractor and drag it off into the main trail, where I had a normal flatbed trailer waiting. I would then cut it up into 2 or 3 foot sections and stack it. Once the trailer was full, I would tow it to the barn, and at the back of this barn, there was a big hydraulic wood splitter. I would split it into 4 to 6 sections, depending on the diameter of the piece. Once I had cut it all, I stacked it all. This was the routine. It was long and hard work, but it gave me purpose and it gave me joy. I thought of myself as something like a pioneer. I was in the great outdoors, alone, taking down trees and supplying villagers with something that they needed to survive. I felt proud of myself, and I also made some cash doing it. I wasn't getting rich, but I had enough for all the things that were needed to survive in such a place like this. I kept this routine for months and months, and the locals began to come to me for wood because it was cheap, and I was a youngster, as they say, looking after my grandfather's home, who was well thought of in town. Then, the winter came, and everything went to shit. Winter on the farm was one of the most depressing times of my life. Not being able to do much work and having no interest in human contacts or internet really brought me down. I reflected on my life and the fact that I had no friends anymore, because I just abandoned them with no warning. Why did I do this? But I had some type of mental feeling that I had to leave everyone behind and never speak to them again. I even began having some suicidal thoughts. The more I thought about it, the more I accepted it as being okay. I wasn't that religious, so I didn't have the thought of going to hell or anything. I viewed it more as if a goldfish were to die. Where do you think it would go? It doesn't really go anywhere. I think it's just that blackness. No more thoughts. Like turning off a car for the last time. I thought about how my family would miss me and how it would hurt them. But I was so depressed, unhappy about the progress in my life, and the fact that I had no one. After a few weeks of minus 30-degree weather and brutal snow, I decided to get on the snowmobile, load up my snowshoes, take my rifle, and go deep into the woods to end my mental suffering. I had given up on everything. I jumped on the sled at 8 in the morning. The sun was brighter than ever. You couldn't even look anywhere without squinting your eyes. The sun reflected off the snowy landscape as if it were like a mirror. With a full tank and a jerry can as a backup, I could go a long way. I let the thing idle and get warmed up. I was thinking to myself that I may actually go through with this. I kept going over the what ifs and buts in my head, as if I was trying to talk myself out of it. But I said fuck it out loud, and jumped on it and let it rip. I took the tractor trail as far as it would go into the bush. It ends after a solid 45-minute drive, and then it turns into a 4-wheeler and gator trails. I took the trail deeper and deeper into the woods. After a solid 2.5 hours of riding, the trail stopped and did a U-turn. It was the end of the track. I then grabbed my rifle, put on my snowshoes, and quickly realized something. I hadn't wrote a note for anyone to find my body, or even know what I had done. I knew that if my parents had no idea what happened to me, they would wonder for the rest of their life. and it would tear them apart. I yelled out and cursed, and I threw my rifle. I faced towards my sled and did it again. I started to turn and remembered that I literally just threw my rifle. I cursed again, got off my sled, and walked towards my rifle that was on the ground. I bent down to grab it, and I stood up. A burst of adrenaline was injected throughout my entire body, and it turned my cold frame into a steel oven. There was a black figure in the distance, hiding behind a tree and watching me. It wasn't an animal. It looked like the shape of a man, but it wasn't a man. I ran to my sled and hit the throttle. I rode back home and didn't look back. To get back home, it only took maybe 2.5 hours or something. I rode fast. I got inside the house, put on coffee, and ate some beans and toast. As I pigged out, I kept having this image in my head, and I was wondering what this was. How did it get there? For how long has it been there? Does it know that I'm still here? How could it survive out here? Is it coming for me? Can it follow my tracks? And does my grandpa know about it? I then decided to call my grandfather in Florida. Unfortunately, he didn't answer his phone. He was most likely relaxing on the beach somewhere, drinking beers. I then cursed myself again. I called my dad just to calm my nerves. He could then sense something was off about me and ask what was up. I told him I was out hunting and I had seen something. I described what I had seen, and he went silent. He took a breath and said, "Son, when I was a kid living on the farm, me and a girl went back to the lake for a swim. We got there on our bikes in August. I had my rifle with me because of all the bears that would pass through their land back then. After me and the girl were swimming around and laughing and doing our thing, she screamed and pointed across. I looked across the pond, and there it stood. It looked like a burned up human being. He was all charred and stuff, and he also had a little bit of hair on the top of his head. His eyes were as bright blue as I had ever seen. Its arms were so long, and its hands nearly came to its knees. It then screamed at us, and the birds flew to the trees. I ran out of the pond, grabbed my rifle, and shot at it. It ran to the trees, and me and the girl jumped on our bikes and got out of there. This was the first and final time I had ever seen that thing or anything like it. I actually hadn't even thought about it in years until you told me that. You need to be careful. In fact, why don't you just come home, son? It's boring up there anyways." I told him I was staying and enjoyed it here, but that was definitely a lie. I got off the phone with him feeling no better. The only difference was that I could think a little bit more clear. I thought if this thing is coming for me, it's gonna take a while by foot, so I figured I got time. I got the guns and put a loaded one in every room. Some had slugs, some had shells. I also had a hatchet that I sharpened to a very fine thickness with a stone grinder in the barn. If it was to swing at your wrist with one motion, it would most likely cut it off. Eventually, I made one final meal, turned on all the lights, and left all the blinds open for good visibility, and to make it harder for whatever it is out there to see me inside. I then went upstairs, which had 2 bedrooms and large windows, one with a walkout balcony. I thought this would be an excellent spot to watch and snipe. As I settled in to see if this thing would come, I began thinking about what I was going to do earlier. I was still depressed, but because I was active and keeping my mind on something, I didn't want to kill myself anymore. Maybe that was it, I thought. Keeping active, busy, and productive, and maybe with a bit of excitement thrown in, it helps to keep your mind off doing something. Yet that doesn't really matter anyways. Just as I was having a bit of a personal milestone, I heard heavy footsteps in the snow. I looked out the window, and before my eyes was that thing that I had seen earlier, but now it was a complete view. I got a strong feeling of nervousness. It was exactly how my dad described it to me. The moonlight reflected off of them like the cover of The Dark Side of the Moon. If I had to guess, it was about 6'3" or so. It had like a longer face and a large overbite. It looked human, but like not human, if that makes sense. I ran out on the porch to get a shot off. It darted around the house before I could even lift my weapon. Then I thought, oh fuck, that thing's fast. I ran inside again, ran to the other window, and I could see it again, just standing there like an idiot, watching me. I turned the crank, and the window opened up. And that's when I said, "Who are you?" There was no reply. It just stared at me. And I repeated, "Tell me who you are, or I'm gonna blow your head off." And then, it spoke. It said its name in a slow, drawn out, harsh voice. It said something like, "Sure, that, my name." I then said, "What do you want with me? I'm minding my own business out here. Leave me alone." And then it walked closer to the house and it looked up at me. My nose was filled with a very pungent smell. It then said, "If you won't, I will." In that exact same drawn out voice that can almost not be described unless I was mimicking it with some type of computer sound program. I then said, "Do what?" It said, "Kill yourself. You failed." My heart froze. It then stretched its arms out from the wall of the house and then tried climbing up the wall like it was freaking Spider-Man or something. I yelled and panicked from the sheer shock and fumbled my rifle. It fell right out of the window, and by this time, it was feet away from the window. It reached its weird god-awful hand into the window, and it cut my arm with its fingernail. I grabbed my hatchet and buried it into its forearm. It then made the sound a bear makes when you shoot at it. It fell to the ground on its side, and I ran for the spare gun in the room. I came back to the window and it was running for the barn. I took a shot and hit it, but it didn't do much. This gun had a shell and it isn't really ideal for the range that I fire at. I pushed my dresser into the hall and pushed it downstairs. I then pushed the few end tables into the staircase. I essentially clogged it up so it couldn't get up there from the main floor. I know it can climb now, but I prefer to have cover from one side than multiple sides. I locked the door and just kept my eyes and ears open. I didn't see it again. Daybreak came quick. I could see its blood droplets in the snow. I climbed over and pulled stuff out of the stairwell and investigated. It was nowhere to be found. I grabbed my rifle and followed the droplets. It went down the tractor trail. I walked for about 10 minutes following this trail. I could see it go off even further in its foot tracks as well. I decided it wasn't worth it to go ahead and try to hunt it. That's when I decided it was time to leave this place for good. I went inside, grabbed my clothes, got into my car, and drove off. I never told my dad or my grandpa. I still have nightmares about this thing, and I wonder how it knew what I was thinking to do. I've been trying to research other sightings and descriptions of it, but I can't find anything. I don't want to say it's demonic because I really don't know, and I'm not really religious like I said. I still don't know what it is. No idea. All I know is that in the last 8 years since it happened, I've been having a bunch of health problems and bad luck. I have night terrors of this thing in almost 95% of my sleep. I do gotta take medication just to stay asleep. I think it may have been the nail that caught me when it reached into the window. I often do wonder if it's still up there, and I would like to go back up there and try to go hunting for it if I got a death wish. But my grandpa passed away 4 years ago. The property was sold to clear cutters by my dad and his sisters. As far as I know, the house was knocked down, and they put up a small office and living quarters for the lumberjacks who clear cut there. If you're wondering where this is, it's near Chapleau, Ontario, in Canada. Something awful happened to me when I was 16. I was living in an isolated area, in the middle of nowhere. To go to my grandparents' house, I had to go all the way down a forest area with a cliff, some really narrow trails, and various dirt paths on the side, and then follow a river till you get to the large chunk of land that he owns. It's basically a death trap. But back then, when me and my friends were young, we were reckless, thinking we were invincible. So of course we did really stupid things like run through these narrow dirt paths. It took about 30 minutes, sometimes 20 if we were running, to go from the small town where my dad and I lived at the time to get there. And again, this is depending on how fast you go. My gramps, being super stubborn and old, refused to leave his land and move into town with dad and me. Now I had two close friends back then. Tom, who was 18 and always instigated whatever stupid thing got us into trouble that week, and Sean, who was the same age as me and was pretty much the butt of all the pranks. He became a bit of a grump and had a huge angry outburst every now and then. Looking back on the whole situation, I don't think that we were all actually good friends, but there was no one else to hang out with, so we just made it happen. The story happened on a rainy afternoon when Tom and I were watching TV at my place. My dad had been working like always. He worked at a farm and was always processing meat, and he got home with a big piece of ham for my grandpa. I was told to take it to him, but Dad said that I should wait until tomorrow because the rain makes the path dangerous, regardless of how mad Grandpa would be about not getting his ham that night. And I thought, it's less work for me tonight, so I went along with it. That day, Tom was just joking and picking on Sean to the point where I actually had to sit in between them to avoid a full-on fist fight. After a little longer, my dad got shit-faced. This was nothing new to us, even though it never happened with my friends here, and it never happened during the week like this. So he most likely had a hard day at work. Us being loud teens eventually, as you can imagine, made him a little less than happy. He came in screaming. This made everything very awkward, and it was a pretty bad outburst. After a few minutes of silence with only the TV breaking it up, I got up and grabbed the ham from the fridge. I asked the guys to come outside with me because I really didn't want to sit with this in the house. I explained to them that I would take the ham to my grandpa and spend the night there. By this point, the sun was starting to set, but Tom insisted that we all go. Sean didn't want to. He didn't want to walk the entire way back in the dark, especially since he was a little unfamiliar with the trails. But of course, we were teenagers, so we called him all sorts of names like, well, you can imagine. And so we eventually convinced him to go, or more like we ended up peer pressuring him to come. So off we went into the forest. Tom ran into his house to get a flashlight beforehand. It wasn't dark enough to need it yet, but we were gonna need it. I was carrying the stupid ham, which meant that my hands were full, but Tom and Sean were just jumping around the overgrown roots until we reached the cliff area. Then, everything went downhill very bad. Needless to say, Tom was just messing with Sean the whole way. It was starting to get on my nerves too, and it was starting to get dark as well. I was feeling pretty shitty at this point. The mud was getting annoying. Everything was. Then, Tom did it. He called Sean over to the edge. He said, what's down there? Sean was having none of it and said he was gonna go back. I would have called BS too, but Tom actually seemed concerned. He also called me over as well, and he said, guys, I'm serious. You gotta come see this. Sean, mumbling under his breath, went, and when he was right next to Tom acted like he was gonna push him off the cliff, and then pulled him back by his shirt. At this point, Tom is laughing his ass off. Sean, on the other hand, fell on his ass. He went crazy. He started throwing punches and kicks at Tom, who was not paying attention and still actually looking at something over the cliff. The laughing stopped when Sean hit Tom in the face. I couldn't do anything but tell him to stop because I was carrying the stupid ham. The fight didn't last. It was so quick. My heart stopped beating for a second. Tom moved out the way. Sean slipped off the edge of the cliff and down into the forest. The whole scene sent chills down my spine. It still does. I dropped the ham and was about to run to town to get some help, but Tom stopped me. He was rambling about how there was no time and that we had to go get him, or that he could die. But I knew damn well that he was more scared of the police finding out that his prank led to Sean going over the side of the cliff. Regardless, we both ran down the path as fast as we could, almost falling over more than once. We were screaming for Sean the whole way, but after the initial scream, there was nothing but silence. Once we got down there, We ended up in a very thick part of the forest. This was in the opposite direction from the way to my grandpa's place. And the thing is, despite living there in the area my whole life, I had never been down in that thick area of the forest. My grandpa was always very serious about never going there. My dad as well. They said it was very dangerous, that there were so many wild animals, and quote, other things that you should be worried about. And by this point, it was dark. The sun had completely set. Everything was damp. Our only means of navigation was the flashlight that Tom had. But that's when I noticed something else was off. The forest itself, in this area, was very quiet. Nothing compared to the path that I always took, which always had birds even in the rain. But here on this side, there was nothing. Like idiots, we ran deeper and deeper, screaming for Sean as hard as our lungs would let us. Suddenly, we heard it, a very scratchy voice. I remember Tom taking a breath because he thought Sean was alive, thinking that maybe he just got really screwed up by the fall. Maybe he broke bones or something and got the wind knocked out of him. I said we ran towards the voice, but Tom was the one running. I got stuck by the branches the whole way through. It's impressive how far adrenaline can take you. But we were completely confused. We didn't even know where we were going. We only heard the voice the one time, and we had already lost the way. We ended up getting to a swampy area in the forest, and that's where we saw it. The mud was up to our ankles and got deeper and deeper as you went. Branches reaching off everywhere. And like I said, that's when I noticed it. I swore I could see something in the trees. Some of those things that I thought were weird branches looked like arms. Tom was still calling for Sean, but he eventually went silent as he was looking down. Then he turned and ran off in the other way. I tried to ask what was going on. I tried to follow him, but then something pulled me back by my jeans. I swore I could feel my jeans rip. Something had a grip on me. I fell face first into the mud. I tried to do my best to get up quickly, find my feet, and then, just barely noticeable at a distance, I saw 2 eyes. And what honestly, honest to God, looked like a mouth giving me a smile, right there in the darkness. I couldn't make out anything else. Nothing, not even a head, just eyes and a mouth. I got up and tried to run in the same direction from where we came, but then I got tripped up backwards by branches that seemed to appear out of nowhere. I thought I was gonna have a heart attack. I started breathing really heavy, panicking. That's when I saw another face, but I thought it couldn't be the same one. From here on, my memories are a little bit blurry. I remember getting up. I remember running. I remember being chased. I remember the only noise I could hear was my own footsteps, my heartbeat, and myself crying. Eventually, I must have reached the river because my grandpa told me that I got to his home late at night. He checked on me and said that I didn't have any severe damage outside of bruises, cuts, and scratches. He told me he locked down the house and didn't sleep a wink, watching over me with his hunting rifle. The next day, I told him everything. He didn't know what it was, but he did go to town and report it all. Sean was found. He was stuck on the top of a tree in between branches. He had snapped a bunch of bones, but he was alive. Tom was found miles away in a clearing, unconscious, barely alive, full of cuts and bruises, dehydrated, and apparently, when he came to, he just rambled for days about eyes in the darkness, branches coming up from the swamp, and tripping him like hands grabbing at him. Needless to say, this put an end to Tom and Sean's friendship, and to be honest, I moved away shortly after this. I'm kinda glad that I'm now far away from that place. This story takes place on my res, the Walker River Paiute Res in western Nevada, at a tribal elder's house. Those from my res will know who I'm talking about. This tribal elder was the oldest member of the tribe when he passed 2 years ago, well into his 90s. When he passed on, his house and property were being disputed between nieces and nephews and his common-law wife, who was from another res. Her grandson, fresh out of prison, ended up staying there. He was a big party person, and he brought his tweaker white girlfriend down to stay in the house with him. None of them had any income, so they started selling off the elders' belongings. They didn't realize that some of what they were getting rid of wasn't just old stuff. It was sacred. The elder had medicine bundles for protection and healing that was never supposed to be disturbed, but they didn't care. They sold it off like it was nothing. Now who would buy stuff like this? You'll learn living on the rest that there are things you shouldn't do, items that shouldn't be touched or messed with. However, there are evil people with evil intentions that want items that belong to the dead so that they can do their witchcraft ways. Or maybe some people just buy these items out of ignorance. Anyways, soon after, the grandson kicked his girlfriend out and he moved in a girl from the local res. Another tweaker, just 18. They kept selling off the elder's things, and eventually, the guy got thrown in jail. Our tribal council voted to kick him off the res, and he left the house keys with the girl. Now, one of my close friends went out there with her one night to hang out and get high, but when he came back, he was shaken. He told me some messed up stuff went down at the house, and my friend knew better than to go hang around inside his house because of who it belonged to. The whole situation about the grandson being thrown in jail and kicked out was known around the res. Everybody knew to stay away from this place. There were quite a few rumors and stories. So he told me they were sitting in the living room, watching TV. He said they started hearing footsteps on the roof. At first, they thought it might be an animal, but the steps were too heavy, like someone pacing back and forth above them. Then, out of nowhere, they heard a low voice coming from one of the windows. It wasn't speaking the American language. It sounded different, but guttural, like someone was chanting some spell or something wrong. Then, my friend said they looked out the window to see what the noise was, and that's when they saw them. The figures. 4 of them. At first he thought they were just people walking around, but he realized something wasn't right. These figures weren't fully human. They were gray, like shadows, but their shapes were all twisted and wrong, shifting around. They moved in a slow, unnatural way, circling the ground outside. He said they were tall, too tall, and hunched over like something was crawling beneath their skin. Their limbs looked weird, bending at all angles, and their heads would twitch unnaturally, like they were struggling to keep a human form. As they moved closer to the house, he saw their eyes, black pits that seemed to draw in all the light around them. Terrified, they pulled the curtains back, trying to ignore the sounds, but when they peeked out again, one of the figures was right there, standing at the window, staring in. Its face was twisted, the skin was stretched tight over sharp bones, and the mouth was pulled into a grin, but it was the eyes, the empty eyes, black, soulless, as he described them, that made him freeze. He swore the thing was looking straight into his soul, like it was putting some curse on him. They didn't know what to do. Running outside seemed like a death sentence, but staying inside felt no better. So they went into the kitchen, going down onto the floor, trying to stay out of sight of the windows. He whispered that they need to stay silent. He said that every creak of the house, every bit of wind outside sent their hearts racing. Then, the scratching sounds began. It got worse. It sounded like someone, or something, was digging, not just outside, but right underneath them. My friend grabbed the kitchen knife, as if that would do anything. But what else could he do? The noise continued, growing louder, almost like whatever was down there was trying to tunnel its way in. They stayed like that for hours, curled up on the kitchen floor, trying to figure out what to do. Every now and then they would hear footsteps again, on the roof, around the sides, or pacing back and forth just beyond the windows. He said it felt like they were being surrounded. As dawn was starting to creep up, the noises stopped. No more digging, No more footsteps. Just an eerie silence. That's when the girl finally told him everything. The truth about the house and what happened ever since the elder passed. She explained how they started selling items that were in a medicine bundle. Items that should have never been moved, let alone be sold. But they had, and in doing so, they had invited something into the home. Hearing that made my friend sick to his stomach. He realized that whatever had been watching them, whatever had been trying to get inside, wasn't just some sort of spirit. He knew they couldn't stay any longer. Fuck this, he said under his breath, and with his heart pounding, he finally decided that they would run to the door. As they scrambled outside, expecting one of these things to come rushing at them. However, the yard was empty, or at least, it looked like it. He said that when they got to his truck, his stomach dropped. The door was open, like someone was inside. All his stuff was everywhere. On the front was a stick, tied up and twisted, and wrapped in something. My friend knew what it was. A witching stick. Something used in dark ceremonies. That's when it hit him. These things weren't just spirits. They were skinwalkers, and they must have been doing some sort of ceremony or curse on the house. He then told me that panic surged through him as he grabbed the stick and threw it as far as he could into the brush. He didn't care where it landed. He just knew he couldn't let it stay with him. They jumped into the truck and peeled out of there, dirt kicking up behind them as they sped away from the house, away from whatever had been lurking there, hoping that it wouldn't follow them back into town. Over the next few days, my friend felt like something was after him. He would see someone moving just out of the corner of his eye, always watching. At night, he would wake up to the sound of scratching at his window, and when he would look outside, he said he would see those same figures standing just beyond the tree line, waiting. He knew he couldn't keep living like that, in fear, as everybody knows that these things, these skinwalkers, thrive off of fear. So he went to go see a medicine man. The medicine man listened to everything, his face getting more serious as he told him everything. When my friend finished, the elder just sat in silence and then spoke to him. He said this was happening because of what had been done in the elder's house. Sacred things had been disturbed, sold off, and in doing so, they had invited something evil. Not specifically him, but the people who lived there. You should never touch a medicine bundle. Also, the moment you laid hands on that stick, it was like you accepted what it was meant for. He explained that these items, done in dark ceremonies, carry a power that's not easily understood. They aren't just items. They're beyond your understanding. Tossing it aside didn't do anything. By touching it, you accepted the curse, you can say. The curse it carried. The medicine man's words scared my friend, as he was finally starting to understand the gravity of what happened. The elder went on to explain that this was not something to take lightly, especially in the home of a medicine man who had passed on. When a medicine man walks off into the spirit side, you must leave their things alone. The medicine man warned, you don't go inside their home, and you never touch what belonged to them. Those items are tied to their spirit, to the work that they done, and disturbing these items is like opening a door that you can't close. The medicine man made it clear that some of these items are sacred, part of the owner. Once that person has passed on, those items are not just left behind for nothing. To disturb them is to disturb the dead. It's like pulling them back, and in doing so, you allow other things to enter the place. My friend sat frozen, realizing that by simply being in the house, by even being a witness about what happened there, he had become part of this whole thing. The medicine man performed a cleansing ceremony, using herbs and chants to sing. Smoke from burning sage and sweetgrass filled the air. My friend said that he could feel the heaviness lifting, but the elder warned him that some things, once disturbed, leave scars that never fully healed, and that there would be people out there, evil people, using this as an opportunity for their witchcraft ways. After the ceremony, my friend said that he stopped seeing things and feeling like something was after him. He didn't see the figures anymore, but the medicine man told him to stay far away from that house. It was a place that had been tainted, and anyone who set foot in there risked being drawn into something they couldn't escape. As for the girl, she was never seen again. She stopped coming around, and no one seemed to know what happened to her. Maybe she left the reservation, or maybe the skinwalkers had gotten to her first. All I know is that after that night, my friend never set foot near that house again. One last thing that my friend told me: never enter the home of someone who has passed on, and what belongs to them must stay with them. So my parents were big outdoor buffs. My father was an ex-champion boat racer, and my mom was an Alabama race country girl, so they always wanted to go camping, fishing, and do all that stuff. When I was little, they went on a trip with some of their friends when I was about 10, which would be about 16 years ago. Since then, they refused to go camping anymore. Ever. My dad told me the story sometime after I turned 18. It still makes me wonder considering the following. My parents moved a lot, and they only had one set of friends that they really kept in touch with at all times: Danny and Lisa. Danny and Lisa were not really outdoor nuts like my parents, but they were friends, and it's fun to go camping with your friends, right? So they all planned a 5-day trip to the lake, which was south of where we lived, with a creek that was on Danny's father's property, so they could camp out on that property and fish all they wanted to. They could then go to the lakes and everything else. I'm gonna tell the rest of the story from my dad's point of view. Well, from his account. The first 2 days were quite normal, just camping, drinking, sharing stories while fishing, going on a boat, and water skiing. It was pretty much heaven. It was just young adult parents having fun. On the second night, everyone kept hearing these weird noises and barks like two dogs were in a fight, but they were both hurt and just yelping the whole time. They figured it was coyotes and they slept. The next day, they continued on their adventures, but at night, they kept hearing these noises, but they were extremely close to the camp, so my father and Danny went up to see if they could scare them off, while my mom and Lisa stayed behind. They were scared, hiding inside a tent, most likely reading the Bible. Anyways, my dad and Danny went out to look for these fighting coyotes, searching by following the sound. My dad had a shotgun, and Danny had a machete. They were hoping to scare these coyotes or whatever it was with a gunshot. They then got to a clearing, and they could hear the noise extremely loud, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere, as if the sounds were kind of distant from each other. Now, my dad isn't really scared of anything, and he swears he saw Bigfoot when he was 14, but this was different. Randomly, he just started telling Danny to go back. No questions, no explanation, just, Danny, we need to go back. So they did, but the sounds didn't fade away this time. Danny nervously asked my dad what was going on, but my dad wouldn't tell him. He just kept shushing him. Danny's a bit of a goofball, which is why I got along with Uncle Danny, so he thought my dad was getting him back for a prank. He kept nudging my dad, trying to get him to say, "You fell for it," but my dad never said anything. Finally, they got close to the creek, a ways up from the camp, and that's when my dad told Danny to run, fast, like, run away right now. And that's when my dad took off. Danny apparently followed but tripped and called for my dad. But my dad, who tears up and chokes up at this part, which is also uncharacteristic of him, refused to go back for him, even though Danny started calling for help. Danny was yelling that his leg was broken. It hurt, but my dad just kept running. Then, my dad, my mom, and Lisa all said that they heard what sounded like a really, really loud mountain lion growl. Almost like two lions going at it, amplified by 70 times. That's how loud it was. It made my dad's ears ring. After this noise, Danny stopped screaming for help. My dad got back to camp, and the ladies asked what the hell was going on, but my dad just said something was out there. My mom, being the practical woman that she is, said, "What was it?" But my dad wouldn't answer. Lisa was freaking out, asking where Danny was. My dad just kept saying, "He'll be here in a few minutes." But it wasn't a few minutes. A few hours passed, and the ladies were extremely worried about Danny. My dad apparently would cringe whenever they said something. Eventually, from the opposite side that my dad had a ride from, came Danny, walking up just fine to the camp, not saying anything. Something my mom says that she won't forget because this is what tipped her off that something was very wrong. Danny first walked up and nudged his way next to my mom, but after the weird look and death stare from my father, he moved closer to Lisa, who had been nagging at him for about 10 minutes. He would either just say yes or no and just stare into the fire. My dad finally asked Danny what happened to his leg. Danny looked up, confused. My dad told him, "I thought you said it was broken." Danny then looked at him and replied, "Broken?" And then, as if on cue, he just started yelling, my leg, I think it's broken." The ladies then grabbed the med kits and first aid and water, saying that it was him going into shock, but upon getting his jeans off, he actually refused to help them and made it hard for them to remove them. There was no obvious break. There was no blood, just bruises up and down his side. Lisa kept asking what happened, but he would just grunt and wave her hands away from him. My dad then said, "He's fine, just let him sleep." They then went into their tents. They said that they heard Lisa nagging on one side, arguing with Danny because he would never reply when she would ask him questions. So she finally said she was just gonna go to the bathroom and pee. Danny asked if he could come with her since there were animals out there. In not so many words, she said okay, and they left. My dad woke up around 10 in the morning and started making breakfast. Danny and Lisa were gone. My mom asked where they were, but my dad wouldn't reply. After a little while, they both came back, without saying anything. They weren't even holding hands, in each other's arms, or even with their arms over the shoulder, or anything like they always were. They were just standing next to each other. They refused food, and Danny would randomly yell out, my leg, as Lisa kept complaining of feeling sick. My mom suggested that they should go home and call off the whole trip on account of Danny's leg, which now was not limping at all, to my mom's horrified recollection. The two nodded, and my father just kind of looked at them. They all agreed, so Danny and Lisa got into my parents' car, not theirs, and they just waited. They didn't even pack up their tents, food, coolers, bag, or anything. My mom then came over and asked if they were gonna grab their things, and they shook their heads. My dad then asked, "Why don't you take your own car?" And they both said at the same time, "Broken," almost like in a creepy, practiced way. My dad sighed, packed up the car, and they drove off. Danny and Lisa stayed quiet the whole way back, except for the random mumblings with each other. My parents then took them home and came and got me, and we could tell something was wrong. Besides them coming home days early, they said that Danny got hurt, and that's why they came home. A few days later, I asked if we could go see them, but my dad replied, "No," a little too quickly, so I thought he was just mad at me, so I left to go play in my room. A few weeks later, I asked about Uncle Danny again, and my dad said that we weren't gonna go see them no more. I wasn't mad, but I was curious, so I asked why, and he told me something about his dad being sick, and I was pretty sad about it, so I eventually just forgot about it, and life moved on. So about 5 years later, I'm at a supermarket where I used to live when all of this happened. It was also right by where Danny and Lisa lived, only on the other side of the road. When I was 10, I was never allowed to go over, but now that I was driving, I decided to go see the old house and check out Danny and Lisa's house. I'm driving down slowly, almost creeping down the street, when I spot Danny walking down. So I'm really excited and I flag him down. I pull over and I start talking to him. He seemed a little stiff to me, kind of robotic, I guess you could say. Especially when he gave me a hug, but it was way too tight. I asked Danny how he's been, and he said he's been okay. I asked him where Lisa was, and he said at home. So I asked him if I could go say hi to her, and he agreed. I walked with him, and I asked him about all kinds of people and tried to catch up with him, but he didn't seem to remember or care about 90% of it, which seemed kind of strange because Danny was always my awesome, involved in everything Uncle Danny. So I asked him a couple obvious trick questions, and he failed them. Now I'm a little bit nervous, but I just brush it off as I was excited to see both of them, and I hadn't talked to them in a long time. So we get to his door, and he opens it, and that's when the smell of a rotten meat locker pours out. A horrible smell just hits my nostrils. The place is a wreck. There's stuff everywhere. Everything is coated in dust, and nothing looks clean. Laundry is everywhere. There are no lights on, and it's just a mess. I ask, what happened here? And he just grunted, a really weird, almost guttural grunt. So I ask after Lisa, and she yelled from the kitchen. She was just behind a wall facing the room, but the wall wasn't a full wall, like with the top touching the ceiling, so I could smell something cooking. I walked into the kitchen expecting to see Lisa making some normal food, and I planned on asking Lisa why Danny was acting weird. But instead, what I saw is unforgettable. She was standing in the kitchen, naked, covered in blood, cooking some kind of mango mess, surrounded by thousands of bones. I was just smart enough to notice a pile of collars in the corner, like actual pet collars. I screamed, and that's when Danny lunged at me. I kind of sidestepped away from him and ran out the door. Danny gave chase after me, and I got to the car and noped out as fast as I could. I got home, called the police, and gave the address. Then I went straight to my dad. He punched me in the face and overheard the conversation with the police, especially when I gave the address. I tried to apologize, and he just yelled at me. He then hit me again and then hugged me and said he was so sorry. I tried to ask him, but he rather strongly told me to shut up about it and forget about it. The police then came to my house and told me they didn't find anyone living there, but my story matched the description of an absolute nightmare. They told me that they suspected that the previous owners left and that a mixture of wild animals and homeless people had been living there. My dad, being the genius that he is, asked why the house hadn't been closed off or why the bill payments hadn't been an issue. The police would stammer and said that they would look into it. Apparently, Danny's father had still been paying for it all, as per some agreement when they got married. I still hadn't seen them since then, and my dad has only told me the story once beforehand. My meeting up with Danny was pure coincidence and only made the story much worse. A couple of years after all that happened, me and my dad got very drunk together. Then, in a drunken state, he told me the story and what happened to Danny. He said he knew what they were, but in my opinion, better Danny than my dad. Don't play with the fire, the locals in Romania used to say. I didn't understand it at first, even though I knew they are very superstitious people. I'm a construction engineer, and I've been recently sent to Romania with the company for a big contract that we won, the construction of a 27 floors building of business offices. I arrived at Bucharest Friday, and the project was set to begin Monday, so I had the weekend for myself. I wanted to visit the city, have some fun, since it was my first time in Romania, but I didn't know anyone. My colleague Kevin was going to get here on Saturday, and the other members of the team had the flights booked on Sunday. It was 6 p.m. I was in my hotel room when the phone rang. It was Kevin. Hey man, how is it there? Tell me the first impression. Hey Kev, I don't really know yet. I mean, the city looks nice, but I haven't been anywhere yet. I'm still in the room. I wish I knew someone to go out tonight with, have a couple of beers, but I guess I'll have to wait for you tomorrow. I don't like going out alone. Why don't you try to hang out with some locals? Kevin asked. And how do you expect me to do that? Go to random strangers and ask them to hang out with me? I laughed. Try the local Reddit. Go and create a post. Just say that you're new in town and if there's anyone who would want to go out for a beer or something. You know what? I think I'll do that. I'll test a beer for you. And tomorrow when we go out, I'll know which one is good. Well, I gotta go. See you tomorrow. I got off the phone, opened my laptop and headed onto Reddit. I created a post. Hey everyone, I just arrived for the first time in Bucharest, and I was wondering if there's someone willing to show me around, go out for a beer. By the way, I don't speak Romanian, so it would be nice if you spoke English too. A few replies came, welcoming me to the city, wishing me a pleasant stay, and stuff like that. And then the following reply came. Hey man, we're a bunch of Reddit friends who frequently go out for beer, and we actually have scheduled a meeting tonight. You can join us if you like. DM me for more details. I clicked on the account. I reviewed it a bit, and I found out that this guy was mostly interested in cats, technology, and cooking. I sent him a DM telling him that I would like to join them, and to give me some details about where we would be going and when to meet. He responded with the name of a bar, which looked pretty nice from the pictures on Google, and to be there outside at 9 p.m. Then he sent me his phone number. It was already 7:30 p.m. by now, so I jumped in the shower, got dressed and called an Uber. I got to the location 10 minutes earlier, and I saw about 5 guys around their 20s waiting outside. I took my phone out and called the number that he sent me. Then I saw one of the guys picking up his phone and answering. I'm here. I think I see you, I said, a bit confused, because this could also just been a coincidence of timing and phone calls. He looked around, fixed his eyes on me and said, yeah, that's us, man. Come on over. I always been an extrovert. However, meeting a new group of foreign guys made me a bit nervous. I walked to them. Hey guys, I'm Ross. Nice to meet you. Hey Ross, I'm Andre, the guy that I spoke on the phone with said. Then he pointed to the other guys and said, this is Mihai, Dan, Angelo, and Bogdan. We headed inside, got ourselves a table and ordered some beers. The guy seemed curious about me and made me feel like the center of attention, but not in a weird or awkward way. I found out that they are all students on different colleges and they all met on the local Reddit some years ago and became friends. Angelo was studying to become a doctor. Mihai was passionate about music, and he also had 2 rap songs already. Bogdan was a very dedicated gamer, which made him skip most of his classes and had to repeat the last year of college. This actually made me laugh. Dan was trying to become a bodybuilder, and that was a visible thing. I told him about myself, what I do for a living, about the project that we're about to start, and about my passion for the paranormal. Well, if you like paranormal, we have a haunted lake here. It's close by. It's called the Witch's Pond, Angelo said. After a short pause, he continued. It's also said that at night, witches are casting spells, and if you go there, bad things will happen. Not even the animals are drinking from it. Really, I always been excited about stories with haunted places, but I never got the chance to visit one. So where is it at exactly? I asked. You want to go there? Bogdan asked. Andre just chuckled, put his beer on the table and said, it's about 15 kilometers outside of Bucharest, located in the middle of a forest. If I think about it, we lived our whole lives here, but never thought about going there. What do you guys think? Should we go there after we finish the beers? My first thought was not to go into a forest outside of Bucharest with some guys that I just met 2 hours ago. But after a bit of consideration, these guys looked nice and harmless, and I didn't feel any threat around them. Plus, I always wanted to visit a haunted place. Well, let's do it, I said firmly, the alcohol starting to kick in by this moment. Should we call an Uber, or how do we get there? Let's pay the bill and call for an Uber. We paid for the beers, went outside while Bogdan was on the Uber app, trying to set the destination point to the witch's pond, close as possible. He had to do it manually since there was no exact address. The Uber will be here in 3 minutes, guys. I requested for 2 cars since it's 6 of us, Bogdan said. It was dark, and I felt so excited for what I was going to do. My whole life was just playing, work, home, occasional nights out, but for the first time in my life, I was going to do something like this, something I always wanted. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my body. The cars arrived and I got into a car with Andre and Angelo, while Bogdan, Mihai, and Dan got into the second car. The Uber driver looked a bit suspicious, and even with fear, when he saw the destination point. And while noticing this, Andre assured him we're only some drunk guys trying to have some fun, and also visit the said haunted place, and that he doesn't need to worry about it. We arrived after 20 minutes and got out of the car. It was pitch black, and the headlights were the only source of light out there. The second car arrived about 1 minute later, being delayed due to catching a red light behind us. We all gathered together and turned on the flashlights of our phone. Mihai then said, we should enter the forest from the other side of the road and walk straight for 2 minutes. Then we should reach the witch's pond. At least that's what it says on Google. It was cold outside, and a very deep silence, the type of silence that doesn't feel right. Mihai went first. We followed. We climbed a small cliff and entered the forest. We made our way to the witch's pond, walking over dead branches, and the leaves brought a bit of sound in the silence that we were surrounded of. After about 1 minute of walking through the forest, the wind started to blow, and all of a sudden, Mihai starts screaming, "Holy fuck, guys. Stop. It's a dead deer over here." A strong rotten smell hit me. I wanted to puke. The wind was now blowing the smell right towards us. We bypassed it holding our breath, and while I got next to it, I took a glance at the deer. Something was off. It didn't look like she died from an animal attack, or being shot by some hunter. It had no visible wounds. And even though it smelled so bad, it didn't look like it was in the decomposing stage yet. I got down to my knees and saw her eyes, wide open, the marks of blood pouring out from her eyes. I put my hand on her neck, and that's what shocked me. It was still warm. Her whole body was still warm. I couldn't understand why there was already the smell present, if the deer had just died. I thought it should be another dead body around, and that the smell was not coming from this deer, so I took a breath of air. The previous smell was 10 times stronger now, and I cannot explain what I felt. I can only say that it was the most awful feeling I had ever felt. At the beginning, I felt a very strong wave of fear going through my body. I wanted to leave, but now my legs were weak, and I felt like I couldn't stand up. My vision started to get blurry, and before I knew it, Andre grabbed my arm and helped me to stand up. "What are you still doing here? I had to come back for you. We didn't even notice when you were left behind. How can you stay in the smell?" he asked. "There's something very wrong with this deer," I said. "Even if it smells like it was decomposing for a few days, it just died. I just put my hand on its body and it's still warm." "That's impossible. Your mind is playing tricks. There's no way that her body is still warm. You felt that rotten smell. It has at least 3 days since she died," Andre replied. "Let's go. The boys are waiting for us," he continued. We headed back to the group and kept going. The air started to feel heavy, and the cold was getting colder with how much we advanced towards the pond. We got to a zone where the trees stopped, and we found ourselves in a small, circular area with a pond in the center. The vegetation seemed dead all over the place. The pond had a greenish color, the color of a sick water. The whole place looked so unnatural. I turned off the light of my phone, opened the camera and took a picture of it. It was my first official visit to a haunted place, so I had to have a memory of it. "Alright then, there's no witches here," Angelo said. "Mihai, take a picture of me in front of the lake." Angelo headed towards the lake and turned his back towards it. "You're too close. Go a bit more near the lake," Mihai said. Angelo took a few steps behind, and he ended up stepping, I assume, on a moist piece of mud. That it scared him that he jumped a few steps behind and landed in the water. Now my feet are not only muddy, but also wet. Angelo had a mad expression on his face while getting out of the pond, shaking his feet, which were pouring out water. "And by the look of that water, you're gonna stink as well. All I know is that I'm not sharing the Uber with you on the way back," I said, semi-chuckling. By that time, he didn't even want to take the photo anymore, and he came back to us. Dan, being amused by the whole situation, said, "Why don't we sing something? In case there are some nearby animals, we'll scare them and leave the area." I nodded. It felt like a good idea to keep us safe from any stray dogs, or possibly even a wolf. "Yeah, that's a good idea. We could do that for a minute, then go back to the main road and call for a cab," I said. "I don't know any Romanian songs, but I can be the judge to see who's the best singer." The guys agreed on the song, and they all started singing all at once. They were a terrible bunch of untalented drunk guys singing, and it was hilarious. I listened carefully, holding on to my promise and nominate one winner, when all of a sudden, I started hearing a great singing voice. The voice was pure. It was music to my ears. And that's when it hit me. It was a girl's voice. A few seconds later, my new friends heard it too, and they stopped singing as they noticed. It was starting now to accelerate and change the tone from a sweet one to an angry and fast-paced flow, and it seemed like it was coming from all around us. Then, the forest was hit by a hard wind, waving all the trees, and the voice was starting to sound louder and louder. The song now was changed to what sounded like a Latin language, if anything, like an incantation. The bushes around us started to move more. The leaves were flying in the wind. The wind was blowing so hard now, but the voice was still clear as before. That's when Angelo fell on his knees, with the head against his chest, and started shouting, "Nex adum immortales libres poneo nex alvio canalum aberto opinion contio sanus es pracumanus." A strong smell of rot appeared, just like the one I sensed on the deer, and it smelled like it was coming from him. The voice now started to shout the same thing as Angelo, and I needed no invitation to get the fuck out of there. I ran as fast as I could, in the same direction that I thought we came from, barely seeing in front of me and hoping that I wouldn't run into a tree. The guys followed as I heard them running and screaming behind me. A feeling of cold and a deep sleepiness took over me, but I had to fight it, to remain focused and get the fuck out of that forest as fast as possible. The voice was still everywhere, as loud as before, but the wind started to blow even more. I was practically running as fast as my body could, and I was jumping over dead tree trunks, looking left and right to see if there's anything in the woods. But there was nothing that can be seen at least. I saw in front of me about 50 meters or so, the tree line ending, and I knew I headed the right way, and I'm almost out. I looked behind me and saw Mihai around 5 meters behind me, and Dan and Bogdan around 30 meters behind us, still running towards us. "We're almost out," I screamed to the boys. A very loud crack sounded in front of us. The sound scared me and I tripped. I got back up a few seconds and kept running. That's when the big tree fell in front of me and just missed me by a few meters. It was an old tree, at least 300 years old, and it just broke in half. By this moment, Dan and Bogdan got to us, and we continued to run. We're practically seeing the road by now. A few more seconds passed and we left the woods, reaching the main road. The voice was gone by now, and the wind was not blowing any longer. The air started to feel normal as well. I sat down on the road, breathing real heavy. I looked at the guys. Everyone was terrified. No one could say anything. Mihai took out his phone, opened the cab app, enabled his location, and got us a car. We sat in silence waiting, and after about 20 minutes the cab finally got there. We went inside and sat quietly the whole ride. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. I just didn't know what to say. When we arrived in town, we headed straight to the police and told them what happened. And we also told them that Angelo was left behind. Of course, they didn't believe us, but they went to investigate. On the second day, I saw it on the news. 23-year-old guy found on the witch's pond. The cause of death, a heart attack. That's when my phone rang. It was Kevin. I answered. Hey Kev, I just landed here. I'm waiting for a cab to get me to the hotel. Can you send me the address again? I somehow lost it. I'll send you a shared location right away, Kev. By the way, I almost forgot. The phone exploded with static. I looked at my screen, and it now showed a phone number that I didn't recognize. After a few seconds of static, I heard a very low voice, but I couldn't understand anything. I put my phone on speaker mode and pressed the volume up to the max. When I heard it, I froze. It said, Next a dume mortales libres poneo next a vio kunanum aberto pigeum contio samus es pracumanus. My great-grandparents, they were never forced to go to residential boarding schools. You know, those that took so many others away from their traditions. And because of this, they were able to hold on to a lot of their old ways, a lot of their traditions, and that's how they grew up. They lived deep in the mountains, far from the influence of outside beliefs or cultures. And that's why our family believes that their connection to these teachings, these traditions, actually protected a lot of our family. So I got a story to tell you. One that's been passed down from my mom and others about something they experienced a long time ago. My mom, when she was just a girl, she lived with my grandparents in a hole-gone way out in the middle of nowhere. Life on the rest back then was so tough and lonely. They didn't have the things that we have now. No electricity, no running water, and definitely not a single road. If you wanted to get somewhere, you traveled by horse or wagon, and even then, it took a whole day just to reach the nearest trading post. Some of the winters were long, and everyone had to work together to survive. Each day was a routine, herding the sheep, gathering firewood, and making sure that the hogan stayed warm. My grandpa was well known across the reservation as a traditional medicine man. People from all over would seek him to perform ceremonies. He actually taught my mom a lot about our traditions, and she always felt a sense of security around him. Like he always had the right words to say to make you feel protected. My grandma was even more practical. She was strong, and she was never scared so easy. Even though she was blind from scarlet fever, she never let that slow her down. She knew how to take care of her family, and her presence actually made my mom feel safe, no matter what. One day, my mom and her uncle were told to herd the sheep like always. They were young and liked to mess around, playing with the sheepdog while they were supposed to be working. The sun was already starting to set as they headed back home, and the cold air began to settle in. The land was quiet, almost too quiet, and something about it felt strange, as my mom said. As they were walking, they started hearing this noise behind them. It sounded like a horse that was following them. But every time they turned around, there was nothing, just trees swaying a little bit in the wind and the bushes rustling. But they couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, lurking just out of sight. The further they walked, the more the air felt heavy. Everything was quiet, almost like something was going to happen. My mom then said that she felt a coldness creeping up her spine, and even the sheep seemed to get nervous, almost like they were sensing something. The sound of their footsteps in the light snow seemed too loud, echoing through all the silence. It was starting to get dark fast. As they neared the corral, the smell hit them. A thick, rotting stench like something was dead. They hurried up to close up the corral and rushed back inside the hogan. But my grandma noticed right away that a few sheep were missing. She then came inside the hogan and handed my mom and her uncle flashlights. and she sent them back out to find the stragglers. I guess my grandma knew that since they like to play with the sheepdog and be distracted, she figured they lost them on the way here. So she came inside the hogan and handed my mom and her uncle flashlights and sent them back out to find the stragglers. The snow started falling again, and the wind was picking up, making it difficult to see. My mom was actually good at seeing in the dark, but her uncle wasn't so lucky. As they walked through the snow, they kept hearing it again, that same sound, almost like a horse galloping behind them, staying just out of sight. The smell was back as well, but stronger now, as if whatever was following them was getting closer. The cold stung their faces and the snow muffled everything else, making the sound of that horse even louder. They did end up finding the missing sheep, along with a newborn lamb, and so they headed back. My mom and her uncle took turns carrying it, and on the way back, the smell was getting worse. Her uncle was too scared to say anything, and again, every time they looked back, nothing was there. They hurried back to the corral, herding the remaining sheep inside, but as they were closing up, my mom said that they felt like somebody was watching them. When they got back to the hogan, my grandma was waiting for them, but she knew something was wrong. The sheepdog were nowhere to be found, which was strange. They always stayed close by, and my mom figured her grandpa was still out doing a ceremony, since he often got called away for his medicine work. When they got back to the hogan, my grandma was waiting for them. The sheepdog were nowhere to be found, and even my grandpa wasn't there. Now the sheepdog situation was strange. They always stayed close by. After dinner, my grandma asked my mom and her uncle to take some extra milk out to the lambs. The snow had already stopped falling, and it was still quiet outside, but not in a peaceful way. It was too quiet. As they walked towards the corral, they opened up the door, and when they did, that's when they saw two big animals sitting in between the sheep. They weren't acting like animals though. They were just there sitting, talking, speaking. My mom simply described them as big dogs that were just sitting across from each other. My mom's uncle froze, too terrified to move. He just stood there, staring at these animals back in shock. My mom, sensing something was very wrong, pulled them away and they ran back to the hogan. When they got inside, she told my grandma what they had seen. Her uncle still couldn't speak, too shaken by what he had just witnessed. My grandma, who wasn't one to back down from anything, she wasn't about to let something mess with her sheep or her family. My mom followed her back to the corral, moving carefully through the snow. The two dogs were still there, still sitting among the sheep, and still talking. My grandma aimed the rifle at them, and the moment that they heard the click of the gun, they started moving. My grandma was able to fire and hit one of them, and it let out this awful scream. They were still able to get away through the back door, running away on all fours. Yenagloshis, my grandma said, her voice steady but grim. My mom couldn't believe it. This was the first time she saw one of them. Her family had told her about them, but she had never seen one of them before. Later that night, in the hogan, they started hearing the same sound as earlier, the sound of horses running outside. When my grandpa finally got home, they told him everything. The next morning, he decided to track these dogs himself. He followed the tracks for most of the day, carefully analyzing all the signs and tracks they left behind. He saw that the tracks were strange, like part human, part animal, leading him through the snow-covered land. Along the way, he noticed that some of the things were off. Ravens were circling in the sky, making all sorts of noises. He said that these were signs from the land itself that something unnatural had passed through, almost like a warning. The tracks eventually led him to a small town. When I say town, I don't mean like a populated city or anything. Just a close community with a few hogans and stores and stuff. He was stopping at every hogan and vendor, well, every stand, and talking to the people there. He said that at one specific stand, there was a man that was sitting behind it. The man who lived there was old and knew my grandpa. When my grandpa got there, the man was sitting in the corner, barely moving, with his leg wrapped up. His wife, who was actually the one selling things, said that he had been injured recently, but she didn't say how. My grandpa didn't ask any questions. He already knew. The talk was that the old man got better for a while, but he eventually died a year later while sleeping. As far as the other dog goes, he was never found. To this day, we're told that if you ever find out who the skinwalker is, that person is supposed to die right away or within a year from the same date of the event. It's creepy, but my mom has so many other stories like this, and you have to be on the reservation to experience them. You heard the rule of don't whistle at night in the res. My tribe actually says the same. However, do you know the other rules as well? The ones about keeping your curtains closed at night. No running around, walking on roads when there's a recent death. Always cover your food at night, and no eating in the dark. No looking outside at night. Don't answer the door if you don't see anyone there, especially if it's 3 knocks. No loud music at night, or any time during a recent death. Well, my grandma always shut the curtains tightly before it got dark, and she kept them that way till morning. Now, before I tell you the story, this of course is aside from all the other rules like don't whistle at night, don't comb your hair at night, don't cut your fingernails at night, or don't look at mirrors at night. So this happened a number of years ago when I was a kid. My grandma took me to a North reservation in North Alberta, Canada. We were sitting in the kitchen with a group of relatives all different ages, from children to elders. I remember seeing that everyone was a little freaked out. There was this calm hush in the living room where the children were silently playing with some toys. As a kid, I overheard my grandmother talking with a group of people about the night before. I noticed everybody was afraid to go to sleep, and they had asked my grandma to say a prayer before they sent the kids to bed. Apparently, the night before, it was raining very heavy, and a group of 3 teenagers were walking from the reservation store to their home. Because it started raining really heavy, they started moving as fast as they could with their hoodies over their heads to try and block out some of the rain as they briskly jogged about 2 miles to get home. It was around 10 o'clock at night, and the skies were cloudy from the rain. It was quite dark and hard to see through the night and rain. Suddenly, they started hearing someone running behind them. They turned around, and that's when they saw something, a hooded figure running towards them and suddenly disappear. They immediately got scared and started running towards their house, but it was really hard to see because it was so dark. That's when the lightning started, and every time that the lightning would light up the sky, they would see dozens of hooded figures all over the ditch roads and by the trees. At this point, they started screaming as they approached their home. They ran inside screaming, getting the attention of all the adults inside. Nobody believed them, and they were trying to calm them down, telling them that they were just seeing things. But that's when everybody went towards the living room window. And there, outside was the hooded figure. Everybody inside the house was freaking out. They shut the blinds and got together in the corner, and they all contacted my grandma by phone for prayer. A day later, there I was with my grandma listening to her pray for the home and the community. I remember being scared at that moment and not wanting to look outside. I never did that night, and to this very day, I always remember the fear and the look of dread on the faces of all those adults and the teenagers in that kitchen. And this is why one of the rules in the res is to not go outside at night and to always close the curtains and blinds. at nighttime. My friend shared the following story with me a few days before he passed away. He was a police officer in the Navajo Res. We were just hanging out on his off day, and he said he wanted to tell me something that he had experienced. He said that one night they got a call about a disturbing at some NHA housing. For those who don't know, that's the Navajo Housing Authority. It took them about 30 minutes to arrive and check out what was going on. They wanted to catch whoever was making all the commotion, so they parked the vehicle at a distance and walked very quiet to the housing complex. He said he could hear someone going through the metal trash cans and no one was around. They started walking quietly towards the noise, and they split up to catch him. As they walked closer, he said the person had a terrible stench like roadkill. He then flashes him with a flashlight and told him to turn around slowly. He said it looked like he was ready to run, but the other officer came around the corner and they ended up boxing him in. He said the person was an old man, but he had white paint on his body. Even his long hair was painted white, and he also had a small pouch around his waist, and a coyote pelt with the head attached and tied to his own head. My friend told me that he didn't want to touch him, and so I know this sounds bad, but I guess it comes with the job. He told the other officer, who was a rookie, to check him out while he kept the light on him. The rookie started patting him down, and he said out of nowhere he just started gagging and throwing up. That's when my friend requested backup, and so then the rookie officer just backed away. He said that they told him to stay still and to lay down on the ground. When the other officers got there, they were all debating about what to do with him. Nobody wanted to take him to the police station, but that's when my friend pulled rank, and he ended up telling one of the sergeants to take him back to the police station. My friend and his partner, the rookie officer, they stayed around to try to find out what he was doing, but they didn't find anything. So they ended up going back to the police station to fill out the necessary paperwork. When they got there, they talked to the other officers that brought the man in, and they said that while they were transporting him, he was singing songs that pertained to evil. When they were taking his personal belongings, they took the pouch that he had, emptied it, and recorded what they found. They said the bag contained some diapers, sanitary pads, baby bones, hair, and everything that had to do with human waste. Personal items like bits of clothing and a bunch of other things. At this point they kinda know what he was doing, but nobody wanted to say it. Over here in the res, people cast evil spells on the person they want to harm, either by death or misfortune, by using some of these items that belong to them. As they were talking, everybody at the police station tried to get his name, but he wouldn't talk. Instead, all he did was just keep on singing. Eventually, they just put him in one of the cells, just trying to figure out who he was. As the night went on, the officer started hearing singing in the distance, and it also sounded like it kept getting closer. All the officers were starting to feel uncomfortable, and the policeman said that a female employee was so scared that she even started crying. Now, the police station was a little bit distant from everybody, and that night, some of the officers eventually went home, as there wasn't that many people needed during the night. So the only people there was my friend, the rookie officer, the dispatcher, and the jailer who was working. They ended up calling the captain who was on call that week, and when he arrived, he walked into the station all scared, desperate, telling everybody to turn off the lights inside. He said there were about 3 or 4 of them outside at a distance. They had a discussion about the situation, and so they all decided to let the man go. My friend said that this was because the captain had gone through a similar situation a while back, and even the judge didn't want to see this person, and they just ended up dismissing any possible charges. They opened the cell door, and he said that the old man just walked past them and just reached out his hand and said, "My bag, please." They ended up giving him the bag, and just like that, he walked out the door. After he left, my friend said that the environment The whole station, everything just felt different. There was also no more singing throughout the night. That's when the captain told them that if they come across this guy again, to not arrest him. As the days went on, my friend said that they got a lot of calls similar to this situation, and he said they have to go check out all calls and report them. However, he said he didn't like going out to them because of the evil that they impart on you. I do sometimes wonder if this was the cause of my friend's suicide. Rest in peace, my friend. My parents own some land that's been passed down to them from my great-grandfather. My great-grandfather bought the land as part of a deer lease around the time of World War I. And later on, my grandfather ended up building a log cabin right there on the land in the late 40s. He continued to expand until the 80s. And now the log cabin is the size of a small house with an upper story and everything. My dad ended up renovating it with a septic tank, solar panels, and even paid to run an internet and phone line, since the neighbor had service about 1 mile from there. Downstairs is the living room, TV room, a kitchen, bathroom, and a small study with shelves full of books on hunting, fishing, trapping, and more. As a kid, I used to spend hours reading books on African safaris, hunting, and the Foxfire series. Upstairs, there are 2 bedrooms and a utility closet. The phone line and the batteries for the solar panels are inside the closet. The place is pretty old school and cozy as hell. I love going up there in the summer, and especially during deer season in the fall. My dad was always nervous about me walking around the woods alone, and always made sure I took a dog and a gun, even when I was just about 10 years old. He told me to come back to the cabin immediately if I ever saw anything weird. I never saw anything, but sometimes I would get a creepy feeling, like if somebody was watching me. Sometimes I would hear a twig snap in the distance, and whenever that would happen, my dog would just look after whatever it was, and I would keep playing or head back. So now, jumping ahead to being an adult, I realized that college wasn't for me. My parents couldn't pay it, and I sure as hell couldn't pay for it on my own. All of my grades, while decent, weren't good enough to give me a scholarship, so I dropped out in my sophomore year. My plan was to take classes one at a time at the local community college until I earned enough credits for a degree. That worked for about a semester, and then I said screw it, and ended up working in construction for about a year. I saved up all my money since I was living with my parents and didn't have many expenses. Then I got an idea. I approached my dad and said, I haven't been to the cabin in a while. I saved up nearly 10 grand, so what if I move out to the cabin? I'll pay for everything, do some upkeep, and sort of rough it for a while. What do you think? My dad was all for it, thinking it would teach me self-sufficiency. My mom, on the other hand, was scared that I would end up hurting myself whenever I would chop firewood, and that I would end up bleeding to death out in the woods where nobody would find me. We ended up overriding my mom's concerns, and I packed all my stuff into my old-ass Chevy Blazer. It was an Army surplus one with rattle can camo. No air conditioning, but it ran like a champ. At least until I ruined it by driving on ice one winter. Just before I left, Dad pulled me aside and reminded me to always keep a gun with me and take both dogs. I was gonna take Kaiser, my young German Shepherd, but he insisted I also take Baxter, his old Australian Shepherd. Baxter was half the size of Kaiser, but definitely top dog. Dad warned me again that there were dangerous things in the woods and told me not to be a macho. If you get scared or something happens, come home right away, he said. And then asked, dangerous like what? Bears? Bears were not that common around the cabin, but they sometimes did wander through. He replied, sure, just like bears. Have fun, stay safe, and call us when you get there. I arrived at the cabin. The scenery was beautiful. Both dogs were glad to be out of the truck. I unlocked the cabin, aired it out, and brought my stuff inside. I called my parents to let them know I arrived, even though I had to use the cabin's phone because my cell phone had no service. I replaced the old TV with my flat screen, which used less power and had a better picture. After settling in, I grabbed my rifle and went outside with the dogs to patrol the property. There was nothing unusual, just some bushes that needed clearing, some weeds that needed to be removed, and a wasp nest on one side. Afterwards, I cooked dinner and watched my favorite film, The Thing, with my dogs flanking me on the couch. Midway through the movie, I noticed the dogs perking their ears up as if they heard something, but they settled down after a few seconds. Right at the part in the movie where the creature eats a guy's hands, there was a loud bang from the kitchen. The dogs tore into the kitchen, barking and growling. I followed them to find a pot of chili I had cooked on the floor, and a couple of pans knocked off the counter. I wondered how the hell that happened until I noticed the screen on the window next to the stove was missing. The dogs then ran outside barking, and I assumed it was just a raccoon trying to get at the chili. I replaced the screen, cleaned up the mess, and called the dogs back inside. They ended up returning. I finished watching my movie and decided to go to bed. Both dogs followed me and lay at the foot of the bed. I lay there in the dark, listening to the breeze rustling in the trees. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a weird warbling noise. It sounded like a bird, but not really. It was like something or someone trying to copy a bird call. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anything. Just pitch black. I rolled over, thinking I was just half asleep, and drifted off again. The next day I took my rifle and the dogs with me to chase any spiders and ants and any other insects out of the deer blinds. I cleared some brush from the trails and started repairing a wooden footbridge over a small creek. About 5 minutes in, I thought, I got a couple of months to do this. Screw it, and decided to stop. Kaiser, one of the dogs, kept staring off into the distance, just growling. Baxter didn't seem to care and just chilled at my feet. I headed back to the cabin, ate lunch, and then went out again to walk the trails and see where the deer were moving. Kaiser ran off barking into the woods, and I followed. We stumbled across what looked like a giant bird's nest made of sticks, leaves, and some other things. It was big enough that I could put a bed in it. Both dogs were going crazy, sniffing everywhere. I then found a pile of nuts under a nearby bush and some small bones, most likely from a rabbit. There was also a little musty smell, but I shrugged it off as forest smells. I figured that whatever animal had been bedding down there wouldn't come back now that the dogs had stomped all through it. I finally pried the dogs away and headed back to the cabin. I spent the next hour or two looking through books in the study. My grandpa used to keep anything and everything as a bookmark. Pressed flowers, leaves, old dollar bills, you name it. I got hungry and decided to cook some beef stew for dinner. As I was stirring the stew on the stove, I suddenly got this creepy feeling. I looked up, and there was something staring at me through the window, not 2 feet away. I literally yelled, "Oh fuck," and dropped my spoon as I backed away. Whatever it was huge and shaggy, with reddish brown hair and deep-set black eyes under a caveman-looking forehead. It had a nose, and it kind of looked like a gorilla. Both dogs then came in to investigate the disturbance. Whatever it was, they caught the smell of that thing, and they went crazy, barking and growling towards the window. This thing, I assume not happy, slammed its fist against the side of the cabin, knocking the frying pans off the wall. My dogs didn't back down. They kept growling. I moved into the living room, grabbed my rifle, and tried to keep my eye on it. Just as I reached for the gun, it stood up. I was eye level with it through the window, and when it stood, it was at least 7 or 8 feet tall. I ran to the window and it was walking away into the trees. I turned on the outside light and opened the door. Both dogs took off after it as it screeched like a banshee, and I fired a shot into the air to scare it off. The dogs didn't come back for over an hour, and when they did, they were covered in mud. I got the dogs inside, cleaned them up, and topped off my rifle. I sat there, trying to figure out what just happened. In my head, I thought it was a prank, a guy in a costume, or a deformed bear. Whatever it was, between the dogs and the gunshot, I was hoping it wouldn't come back. I ate my stew and cleaned up, so that the smell wouldn't attract it again. I double-checked all the windows and doors and went upstairs, taking the rifle with me. The dog stayed glued to me the entire time. There was no way I was going to stay downstairs where that thing would watch me through the windows. I finally fell asleep, figuring that whatever it was had most likely left. I woke up later with no idea what time it was. Then, that warbling, chirping noise was back. Something hit the side of the cabin. Both dogs started whimpering or growling. I shot my flashlight out the window, but I didn't see anything. I turned off the light and waited about 30 seconds. This time, I saw a rock bounce off the side of the cabin right below my window. Some guy must be in the trees throwing rocks at my cabin. I yelled out, "This is my cabin. I got a gun. Get the hell out before I call the sheriff." There was silence for a long minute. Then, a rock hit the window frame, just a foot from my head. I thought, okay, you want to play games, huh? I stuck my rifle out the window and fired a shot in the general direction of where the rocks were coming from. That's when I heard that weird noise again, and that's when something big went tearing through the brush. Nope, fuck this. I closed all the upstairs windows, tossed my rifle on the bed, and grabbed my pistol. It was time for the heavy ones now. I grabbed my rifle from the closet, slapped in a 20-round mag and chambered the round. I put on a headlamp, grabbed both dogs, and headed out the back door into the woods. I was thinking, you're not gonna get away this time. I'll teach you to screw with me in my cabin. The dogs ran off into the dark, barking, and I followed right behind them. About a half a mile from the cabin, I started to rethink this whole situation of running into the woods at night, behind some unknown creature. I couldn't see the dogs, but I could hear them. They were definitely chasing something. Then, I heard that loud screech from before. I ran to catch up with the dogs but tripped on a rock and face planted. Adrenaline kicked in, and I got right back up, barely noticing the fall. Suddenly, I heard one of the dogs yelp in pain, but I couldn't tell which one. I ran even faster, shouting for the dogs. That's when I saw something looming on the trail ahead of me. It was Baxter. He was limping, and his left hip was bleeding. It looked like he got hit with a rock. Now I was fucking pissed. I kept heading down the trail to catch up with Kaiser, and Baxter limped along beside me. I heard screeching and Kaiser barking, as if he had whatever it was cornered, or up a tree. I was almost there when something whizzed through the air and nearly hit me. It came from a different direction than the screeching and barking. I then said, "Oh fuck, there's two of them." I fired a shot in the general direction of where the rock came from and called for Kaiser. Baxter wouldn't leave my side. Then, a big stick flew through the air and landed at my feet. I couldn't tell where it came from with just my headlamp. I fired another shot and thought, fuck this, I'm heading back to the cabin. I kept firing shots occasionally to keep whatever it was at bay. I could hear it crashing through the trees and brush. Kaiser was still barking and wouldn't come when called. I was nearly back to the cabin when I heard Kaiser yelp again. I called his name for what seemed to be the 15th time, and I heard something crashing through the brush. I aimed my rifle at the noise. Kaiser appeared, running at Mach 2, and zoomed right past me. He kept going and I thought, oh, yeah, thanks, just leave me here for dead, huh? Every now and then, I would fire another shot to try and discourage pursuit. I kept hauling ass back towards the cabin, with Baxter right on my heels. Kaiser was already waiting for me at the door, whining and scratching to be let in. Kaiser is a big dog, one that's taken down a coyote that got into our yard one time. I couldn't help but think, what the hell has him so scared? All three of us piled into the cabin. I reloaded my rifle and started checking the dogs over. Baxter had a nasty bruise from where the rock had hit him, but only a little bleeding. Kaiser seemed unharmed, but something had scared the absolute fuck out of him. I ran upstairs, barricaded the door behind me, and opened the window so I could shoot at anything approaching the property. I thought about calling my dad or the sheriff, but then I remembered that the phone was downstairs. That's when I heard rustling in the tree line, and more of that weird noise. but nothing came out. At least, I didn't see any more rocks or sticks being thrown at the cabin. I finally started to relax and feel safe around dawn. But with no sleep and the adrenaline wearing off, all I could do was hang my gun up before passing out on the bed. I woke up around noon, made a sandwich for lunch, and thought about my situation, whatever these things were. Maybe some escaped circus gorillas, Bigfoot, bears. There were at least 2 of them, and they were big. They also didn't seem too friendly, but I got the impression that they weren't as much of a threat as they could be. They could have been more malicious if they wanted to. I felt like they were harassing me in revenge for scaring them off with the dogs and gunshots. When one of them tried to reach through the window and steal my food, I decided to set up a trap. I emptied an old musty can of deer corn into the ground, spread it around a leaf pile where I could aim perfectly from the bedroom window. I also poured a can of soup onto the pile as additional bait. I went back inside, hoping that they would take the bait, and I would finally get a good shot at one of them. I kept my gun belt on, and my rifle within arm's reach all day long, just in case they came back during the day. I spent the day watching movies, checking the bait pile every few minutes. Both dogs were nervous, but they didn't seem to pick up anything that would set them off. They stuck to me like Velcro all day. The night came, and I double-checked all the downstairs doors and windows to make sure they were locked. I sat up at the bedroom window with a perfect view of the bait pile, ready to ambush. About an hour into my vigil, I noticed the outside lights were getting dim. I thought, why is this happening? I suddenly realized that I had left the cabin lights on all last night and all day today. It had been cloudy and overcast, meaning that the solar panels hadn't charged the batteries well. With the lights and TV running, I drained them. Even if I turned off all the lights except for the 2 outside, they wouldn't last long. I thought, well, that's what the generator is for. The noise might scare the creatures away or it might not. I had to try. I headed downstairs, turned off all the lights as I went, and I braced myself. The generator was in a little enclosure on the front porch, so nobody could steal it, but I had to go outside to start it. I took the dogs with me outside, and they indicated that nothing was around at the moment. I set my rifle down, unlocked the generator enclosure. I flipped all the right switches and yanked the cord. The generator hadn't been used or started in months, so it took 6 tries before it finally came to life. I grabbed my rifle, called the dogs, and went back inside. I went into the kitchen, flipped the switch from solar batteries to generator power, and the outside lights went from really dim to full power. I turned to the kitchen window. It was dark. Something was blocking the light. I realized one of the creatures was hunched over, peering through the window, trying to see inside. I started to aim my rifle at its face and fire 5 or 6 rounds as fast as I could. I must have jerked the trigger because the window exploded in a spray of glass and the thing started howling like I hit it. But instead of dying from a gunshot wound to the face, it just turned and walked off into the woods. I ran to the window, but I didn't see anything. I could still hear some noises and what sounded like a person moaning in pain, and even some sobbing coming from the tree line. Screw this, I'm out. I grabbed the dogs, ran to the front door, locked the cabin behind me, and jumped into the Blazer and went towards town where I could get some cell reception. I immediately called my dad and told him everything. He said he was coming out to meet me and told me to stay put. About 2 hours later, he showed up at the truck stop where I had been waiting and had me repeat the story to him again. Then, he followed me back out to the cabin. When we got there, the generator was still running, and the outside lights were still on. We cleared the cabin, and there were no intruders. We sent the dogs outside, and they just walked around normally, even went to the bait pile, but they didn't seem to think anything was around. Dad did find some blood underneath the window, and he followed the trail of it to the tree line. Obviously, he was smarter than me, and he didn't go into the woods in the dark. We cleaned up the broken glass and boarded up the window. Dad swapped his shotgun for my rifle that I had left upstairs, and we talked about what the hell was going on. He mentioned to me that he had seen them twice before, The first time, he saw a small one when he was a kid. He was running around playing like I did and came across one of them drinking from the creek. It saw him. It made a noise like a monkey, and then it ran off. He wasn't sure if he had just imagined it or if he really saw it. But regardless, it wasn't much bigger than he was at the time, and it didn't seem dangerous. He changed his mind years later when he was an adult. He was sitting in a tree blind, waiting for a deer, when a full-grown one stepped out of the trees and started eating his deer corn. He debated shooting at it, but it noticed him and walked over to the tree. Then, it reached up and nearly touched his foot. It was that tall. Dad panicked and threw a full can of beer at it, but missed. The thing reached for him again, chattering like a bird or something. He grabbed a second beer from his mini cooler, and this time, he beamed it right on top of its head. It made some noise and ran off into the trees where he couldn't see it. Then, it started throwing handfuls of rocks and sticks at him. He fired a shot to scare it off, climbed down from the blind, and ran back to the cabin. He never saw it again, but knowing it was out there always freaked him out, which is why he had always made me take the dog and the gun with me as a kid. He never told anyone about what he saw because he didn't want people thinking he was crazy or saying that he was drunk and seeing things. Now 2 of us have seen the same damn thing. That night, it didn't come back. We went into town the next morning to get a replacement window and make sure the cabin was secured. I put all my stuff in the Blazer and we ended up driving home. We didn't go back until deer season. There was no sign that the things had tried breaking into the cabin since we left, and I haven't seen or heard anything. We never tried to follow the blood trail in daylight, so I have no idea if I seriously wounded it or if it was just a flesh wound or something. Now, here's what I saw and heard. The thing was about 7 or 8 feet tall, wide and muscular like a gorilla, but it stood upright like a person. Its head was bullet-shaped, and it had deep-set black eyes with a heavy brow, like a stereotypical caveman or gorilla. It had a flat nose, and its mouth stuck out like that of an ape. I never saw its teeth. It also had small ears that stuck out from the sides of its head. It was covered in head to toe in some rust-colored, reddish-brown hair, long and coarse-looking. It didn't seem to have hair on its face or hands, but it was really dark, and I was scared, so I can't say for sure. It smelled like a wet animal, a very musty smell. There were definite signs of intelligence or tool usage when it threw rocks and sticks at us. The vocals that sounded like a chirpy noise, almost like a bird trying to imitate a call. I knew there were 2 of them, even though I never saw more than one. If you live next to a forested area, stay safe. Another day, another dollar towards beer money, I thought as I pulled into my company's parking lot. As I walked into the office, I heard the deep voice of my manager Jerry say, "Hey bub, you're going out of the area today." Out of area, meaning I was going to be driving to the middle of nowhere, maybe get one job completed, then have to be back here by sundown. As I was pondering the shitty situation, Jerry walked up to me and slapped me on the back like an alcoholic dad who doesn't know the meaning of too hard and said, "Bobby, you hear me? Yeah, I'm making less money for the good of the company, right?" Jerry frowned. The sarcasm in my voice was almost beyond his grasp, but eventually he got it. "Listen here, you little ass clown. The company's gonna pay double for your gas. We'll take the drive into account for your bonus and give you free service for your truck. They treat us good if you do good by them." And Jerry, a balding middle-aged manager who would always give the same speech in the same tone to everyone who had ever complained about doing anything extra. Of course, I had to ask him why I was the one doing it. "Well, because of Roger," Jerry said, referring to the guy that worked the northmost tip of our area. "He decided that he hates you, and he called off this morning. But why am I the one who has to take his work? I asked. Because you're an asshole who needs to learn his work ethics. And don't go talking about how you served in the Marines and how much you work. I fought in the Gulf under General Norman Schwarzkopf, and I know what hard work is. People like you turn the corpse into a bunch of lazies. Jerry, if you didn't notice, was a Marine like myself. But he served the Marines in the time before the quote-unquote lazy generation, as he dubbed the millennials. But to be honest, he was a warehouse manager, like he is now. When I was in the Marines, I was busy dodging pissed off Taliban snipers and IEDs, so screw him. I know, Jerry, I'm scared because I actually wore my body armor. But anywho, before we start this, where the hell am I going? I ended up asking, trying to avoid any normal arguments. Jerry sighed and said, out in the Ozarks, near Grand Cap. Grand Cap? Literally a post office and a general store, smack dab in the middle of a massive forest that goes for about 2 miles off of AR-7. The customer needs 2 rooms done and a satellite set up as well, Jerry finished. He sounded like he may have felt bad, because he knew how much I hated setting up those dishes. The chance of us actually getting a signal for the satellite was little to none. So I'm driving 120 miles out to the mountains, so I can tell some backwoods inbred that he can't get his TV because of the trees. I must have been a killer in the past life, I complained. And yes, Jerry, I know I'm gonna be compensated. A couple of minutes later, I loaded up my truck and started the long trip north into the mountains. I knew the drive was gonna take over an hour and a half on empty roads, so I started to let my mind wander. I've been with cable, satellites, and more for about 2 years now, and it still amazes me I haven't quit or killed myself yet. The hours suck. The pay is alright, and all the upper management just spends most of their time kissing the big cable companies, begging for scraps. Now, you may be asking yourself, how the hell did a combat veteran with access to the GI Bill and 4 years of leadership training end up installing cable in Arkansas? The best way to answer that is, instead of taking classes and getting a skilled labor job, I wanted to be a badass. At 18, I only wanted one gig, the infantry. It gives you the ability to act under pressure and learn how to lead men into combat. But when you get out, most jobs want people with applicable skills. So I tried college, a state school filled with former professionals turned professors, expansive libraries brimming with information, companies from all over the nation recruiting to get the pick of the best candidates. Shit happens, and I got this gig while I was directionless. Speaking of that, that's the word used to describe me by my court-appointed therapist. I'm gonna leave most of the details out, but some little punk decided to tell me a few things, and I decided that him eating my fist would be the best solution. One thing led to another, and I had to go see a shrink for my quote-unquote PTSD. PTSD my ass. I like what I did over there. Get up, go on patrol, shoot a few guns, then go back. But now life is complicated. I gotta pay rent. I have to be politically correct. Well, whatever. Maybe I'll be lucky and whoever this customer is will be a super hot student staying at her parents' cabin for winter break. Maybe when she answers the door, she'll look me in the eyes and fall in love with me. Looking back, I really wish that was the case. As I got closer to the address, the GPS on my phone started acting a bit strange, but it was able to steer me to the right driveway. Well, driveway was the word. It was more or less a dirt path shrouded by old as hell white oak and cottonwood. I heard leaves and pines crinkle under the weight of my truck as I steered down the narrow track. As I drove deeper, I noticed that this part of the forest was dense, and it barely looked touched. See, I went camping in the Ozarks every year with my dad up until I was 17. Almost everywhere we went, you could tell the woods had been affected by people in some way. You know, random piece of trash, carved initials of young lovers, tire and human tracks and all that stuff. But these trees, This path and everything, it seemed to have remained untouched, even though someone apparently lived out here. It was weird to say the least, especially because there seemed to be no tire tracks going up the driveway. The path continued on and on, to the point where I didn't think I could fit my truck on it much longer. Then, I saw an open area, about 200 yards ahead of me. I silently thanked the man upstairs that I wouldn't have to drag all my equipment through the woods. As I approached the opening, I caught my first glimpse of the house, or better yet, shit pile that I would be working on today. It slumped at around 2 stories, with rotted wood siding, and maybe 2 out of 10 windows not smashed in. The front lawn was just dirt, leaves and pines everywhere. I couldn't fucking believe my eyes. How am I supposed to install TV boxes when there is no power? I thought. This is probably some redneck with some sort of custom wind turbine strapped to a tree. He's most likely gonna ask why he can't get his NASCAR. I scanned for the front door, and I saw a big plane covering the largest of the house's openings. I decided that was my best bet as the front door. At this point, I was just hoping no one was home. There was no car. Everything was overrun, and there couldn't possibly be a decent source of power anywhere on this property. But I know God was definitely not on my side that day. As I approached the front door, I saw some movement beyond one of the non-smashed-in windows. I may have seen some crazy stuff overseas, but someone actually living out here in this busted house couldn't be someone I wanted to be alone with. But if I didn't at least try to complete the job, I wasn't gonna get paid any bonus. As I arrived to this front door, plank-looking thing, I slowly reached my hand to knock, but before I could, it swung open. Behind the door was a person. This guy stood at 6 feet tall, no more than 120 pounds, white as a ghost and seemed to be made of only bones and thinly stretched skin. He looked like someone had sucked all the fat out of his body, but the creepiest part was his eyes. They seemed empty, the pupils so expansive that I couldn't make out the color, and barely see the whites. I realized I had been staring, and looked down at the papers that I have. "Good morning, sir. Is this the residence of Mr. Vitter?" I barely got it out before he opened the black hole that was his mouth. "Why have you come?" His words rolled off his tongue, with a thick Scandinavian accent. I could barely respond. "Why have you come?" Here I was trying to install a satellite for Count Dracula, and he doesn't ask me what I want, or who I am. But, why have I come? Who the hell says that? "I'm your cable technician, here to get your TV set up." It was all I could get out with his pitch black eyes staring right through me. He continued to stare for what felt like an hour, until he opened up his mouth again. "Come forth into my home. I will show you where you will be working. But be warned, I don't like anything in my home touched. Your business here is the TVs only. Is that understood?" This guy looked like a fucking Skeletor and sounds like a James Bond villain, I thought. "Yes, sir. I won't touch any of your stuff, or knickknacks or personals. Just want to set up the TVs and head back to Little Rock." He stared at me for a second and turned towards the dark house, beckoning for me to follow. As I followed behind him into the ramshackle house, I couldn't help but notice the smell of decaying meat, mixed with some sort of rusted copper. It was almost like I wandered into an abandoned slaughterhouse, and I could smell the years of blood of animal parts. "Don't think like that. This guy is most likely a hunter who lives off the grid, and finally decided that he missed the ESPN and called us up," I thought. But the smell wasn't the only off-putting characteristic of Mr. Vitter's home. It was the decor, or the lack of. The front door opened directly into what can barely be described as a living room. The only sign that an actual human lived here was a rocking chair. The wood was badly scorched, and the only parts that weren't burned were heavily frayed. I felt like if I sat down in it, I would be pulling 1,000 splinters out of my ass. I took my eyes off the chair, and I finally saw the TV that I would be connecting to the receiver. I say TV sarcastically because I'm pretty sure the set that I grew up with 29 years ago was even more advanced than whatever this thing was. I saw that this old thing still had the original wood paneling and everything. I hope to God that I had some sort of adapter in the truck, because there's no way I was going to tell Dr. Frankenstein that I didn't have the parts. This is the first TV. It's from 1949. I was told your company specialized in connecting new age media to these type of TV sets. Am I correct? Mr. Vitter turned and looked at me with his empty eyes as he asked. Yes, sir. It should be. I can always figure this out. I lied. The oldest TV I set up was from the 90s. I'm so fucked, I thought. I'm gonna punch Roger in the fucking throat as soon as I see him. He better buy me a beer for calling in. Good. I would be very disappointed if I don't have my shows, Vader said, as he smiled and put this emphasis on very. He let me pause in the living room to assess the back of the TV. One look told me I was screwed. This TV didn't have a single connection I recognized, but I had an idea. The job description I received for Mr. Vitter stated that he didn't want the satellite on the roof. He wanted the satellite on a pole, and from my experiences with these type of mounts, there is a high chance that this guy won't get a signal, or even that the ground ain't right for a mount. All I had to do was take my satellite reader and pretend there wasn't a trace of a signal. Oh, and I forgot to mention, explain to this guy that he wasn't getting his shows until my manager came out and verified. Fuck it. Jerry can die for the company he loves. I'll get over it. As my spirits started to lighten and my mood turned from depressed and terrified to less depressed and slightly hopeful, that's when my customer decided that I was staring at his TV for too long. I will lead you to the next TV. Hopefully this next one will not take long for you to study. He sounded mad, so I gave him the go-ahead to bring me further into his creepy-ass house. So I saw the power outlet behind the TV, but no power lines to the house. Is there a generator connected somewhere? I had to ask, because I didn't hear the loud hum of a generator, nor did I see any sign of power being run to the house. My host turned to look at me with his eyes and hissed, "How my homework shouldn't concern you." As he said this, I could see what little blood this guy had rushed to his face. He was angry, and he seemed like he was barely able to contain it. He turned back around and started heading further and faster towards the back of the house. I was about to apologize as I fought to keep up with him, but that's when I caught something with my eye. It was a picture on the wall. One of those old-timey pictures, the ones that you see in people's grandparents' house. I could only take a quick look, but from what I could tell, even in black and white, one of the men in the picture looked exactly like Mr. Vitter. The only difference was the guy in the picture had normal eyes. It couldn't be him. This picture had to be from the 1880s or something. Vitter then stopped, and before I could finish studying the picture, he pointed towards an open doorway to our right. He then said, "This is where the last TV is, and it's exactly like the first one. Do you need to stare at it for some time, or will the information I have given you be enough?" As he asked me, I could feel sarcasm and frustration pouring out of him. What the fuck is this guy's problem? I thought. Then, out loud with a forced smile, I said, "Just knowing the type of TV and where it's at will be enough for me." The weirdo seemed satisfied with my answer, and took me a bit further to a back door, flanked by two more busted out windows. He opened the door and walked through them to the backyard, which was exactly the same as the front. Everything a mess. This is where the last TV is, and it's exactly like the first one. Do you also need to stare at it, or will the information that I've given you be enough? Okay, sir. I know you want the satellite somewhere in the yard, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to find the signal. I'll come knock on the door when I do. He looked at me and said, "I'm gonna stay outside. You seem young, and I generally don't trust young people like you." How the fuck are you supposed to respond to that? I looked over at Mr. Creepy and said, alright, it's kinda boring, but feel free to watch. No other way to follow someone telling you he doesn't trust you. Well, who could blame him? I was planning on saying there was no signal, even if there was one, and going home. As I started wandering around the yard, hitting random buttons on my signal finder to further help my goal of pretending to find a signal, I was able to take in more of my customer. His eyes and ugly ass face kept me from looking at what he was wearing. His clothing looked as worn as he did. His long black coat was covered. This guy's just all sorts of fucked up, I thought as I was wandering around the yard. I also noticed something else that was a bit suspect. Every 3 to 5 yards or so, there seemed to be little holes recently covered up. It looked like he was planting a garden, or maybe some trees. I would have asked, but he was obviously not wanting a conversation. After about 10 minutes of drifting around and acting like I was doing something. By the way, his eyes never left me. That's when I decided it was now or never to tell him that I had no signal. Sir, I hate to say this, but due to the trees in the area, I have no line to your provider satellite. The only option would be to remove some of the trees. I was barely able to continue before the anger flashed in his big dead eyes, and the blood started rushing to his face again. You're not gonna touch any of my trees. They are precious to me. As he screamed this, he closed the 10-yard gap between us in 3 steps. And you will give me my shows. He was so close to me by this point that the lifeless holes on his face were mere centimeters away. Okay, this was my final fucking straw with the psycho. But I know I would lose my gig if I blew up one more customer. I took a deep breath and said in my best customer service voice, Sir, I understand you're upset. I think the best way to fix this situation is to try to get my manager out here. To myself, I thought, fuck Jerry. Let's see how tough he really is when he meets this crazy guy. As I said this, Vitter seemed to settle down and the blood stopped filling in his face. Very well, but you must know I care very deeply about my forest. Don't harm it in any way, he said, still containing some of his anger. What needs to be done next? Well, I need to go get the proper forms for you to sign that we can go ahead and call Jerry, my manager. And don't worry about the trees. We won't touch them, I said, trying not to smirk. Is this Jerry as insolent as you and as uncaring about my forest? He asked. I looked up at him, trying with all my might to not look pissed, and said, only slightly sarcastically I might add, not at all. He's a perfect gentleman and he loves trees. I mean, the guy has at least 12 in his backyard. Somehow, this satisfied the tree-loving psycho. So I'm gonna run over to my truck and get the forms. Do you want me to meet you inside? I asked, hoping he would say no, and that I wouldn't have to go back into that terrifying place. No, I'll be out here waiting. As he said this, he seemed to root himself on the spot he was standing, like his trees, and remained unmoving. I took this as my sign to get the fuck back to my truck and get Jerry's fat ass out here. Not wanting to go through that house, I took the long way around the side and back to the safety of my waiting truck. As I passed the side of the house, I saw something that caught my attention. A massive painting was hung on the wall, possibly being the only object not completely destroyed. Well, a mess, but still very creepy. The painting was that of a big tree, but it looked like all the branches ended with a human head, with no eyes and dripping out blood. But the trunk of the tree decided it had to outdo the branches in the most fucked up contest ever. The trunk was shaped like a man, whose legs were firmly rooted into the ground. Its body was straight as an arrow, and its arms held high in the air, turning into the most creepiest branches. But the face of the trunk man took the cake for the challenge. The mouth was locked in a permanent scream, spewing blood that pulled up at the tree's roots. The eyes were wide open, fixed on the branches above as if it was in a trance, with the gore-stained scene going on above its head. What the fuck? I mumbled to myself. If you were smart, Bobby, you would leave. So I decided to ignore the massive evidence that this place was probably not safe and continue on to my truck. As I approached my truck, I couldn't help but notice that it looked lower. Now, before you have to ask, yes, my truck was lifted, and I may or may not be compensating for something. But anyways, as I got closer, I saw that my 2 front tires had gone flat. I then said out loud to myself, "Fuck me." I nearly yelled out, but I kept it down so I wouldn't have to deal with this crazy psycho. I walked over to my now useless vehicle and inspected the tires, and when I realized what happened, I cursed myself. Since I was so busy trying to avoid pulling equipment around, I didn't notice I parked directly on top of an upraised tree root. Now I had to not only make Jerry come here, but I'll need him to pick me up some spares. He was most definitely gonna be pissed. I took one more look at the depressing sight, which was my lifted 24-inch custom tires, and opened the front cab. I started fumbling around with my little folder filled with different paperwork until I found the right documents. Thankfully, I had one copy left. The first good news of this fucking day. The shitty part of this no signal process is that you need a customer to verbally confirm with the manager that they want the site issue confirmed. Don't ask me why. Most likely some legal bullshit. I started making my way back to the yard, but this time I took the other side that didn't have the creepy ass painting on it. As I arrived again to the backyard, I couldn't help but notice the absence of Mr. Vitter. Shit, I muttered to myself. I headed towards where he was last standing. Maybe he was taking a leak behind one of his precious trees, and God knows there was no plumbing in that horror show of a house. I made my way towards the end of the yard, carefully avoiding the little mounds, and started scanning the tree line. After about 30 seconds, I started to turn away and make the walk to the front door, hoping that he didn't want me to come inside. But as I was turning, I caught a glimpse of something black billowing about 100 yards away in the woods. I moved a bit closer and further away from the house and could sort of make out the object. It was his jacket. As I took a closer look, I then saw a black boot only a few feet from where I was standing, and another one roughly 30 yards past that. Did this guy just strip down and wander into the woods? Well, this was it. The weirdest fucking day of my life. Now, you may be thinking, why didn't I book it and flag down the first car I saw and get the hell out of here? The answer is, I'm an idiot, and I'm curious by nature. Also, I couldn't just leave a job. It would apparently jeopardize the trust between my small company and the big ones that we contract for. My next step would be to call Jerry and figure out what the hell I need to do. I pulled up my phone and hit Jerry's number. As I waited for the familiar voice to ask, "What the fuck do you want?" the phone cut off. I looked down at my screen and saw the dreaded "call was lost" tag pop in front of my screen. Fuck. I tried again, and this time it wouldn't even ring once. I started wandering around the backyard, hoping there was a stronger signal somewhere. When finally I gave up, it was pointless. It dawned on me that Jerry was with one of our new guys today up near Mountain View, about 100 miles east of where I was, and a good 2-hour drive. On top of that, the cell service may have been even worse out there. Shit, no other manager was in today. Even if I could get service, they wouldn't pick up. My only option was to call the dispatch office for the satellite company. The folks over there have zero sympathy for us not completing a job that was given to us, but having someone at least be aware of my situation may stop me from being canned. I made my way to the front yard and thankfully found a single bar of service. Just in case, I tried Jerry again, but there was nothing. Nada. I started scrolling through my contacts list and found the number I was looking for. It started ringing. Thank God for small miracles. I waited for a moment and I heard the lady sigh. These fucking heartless bastards. I just needed some small assistance, but it was too much of a fucking problem to take a call. I heard it 150 times before. I wanted to say, I barely got this call going, but instead I tried a more diplomatic approach. Ma'am, I apologize. I know this isn't standard, but I can't reach my boss. He's actually out of service. I waited, praying that she would just have some sympathy in her heart. And just like that, I was sitting there in the middle of nowhere, listening to the soft tunes of logins while I was waiting for my dispatcher. The music abruptly stopped, and I heard an equally pleasant, male voice on the other end. "This is Jack. I heard you got a problem out there in Little Rock. Thank God this guy wasn't a dick. Hey Jack, I got some weird stuff going on out here. I'm in the Ozarks, deep down in some backwoods stuck with an MIA customer. I said, the job number, here it's 306742. I heard Jack typing away at his keyboard, and a few mouse clicks later he said, okay, Mr. Bitter. Oh yeah, he's totally out of your work area. How'd you even end up out there? Fucking call out, man, I said, realizing that these phone calls may be reviewed and I should ease up on the language. Okay, so you said he's like MIA? Like he's not at home? No, Jack, I went to my truck to grab some some stuff, and I came back and this guy was just gone. The weirdest part though, I saw a trail of his clothes leading out into the forest. Like, his clothes? Yeah man, his clothes. From what I could see, it was his jacket and both of his boots. Even I was starting to think that this was made up. There was no way this guy was gonna believe me. I'm looking through all my notes here and there's not a single SOP explaining what to do if a customer wanders off into the woods. But I am pulling up some satellite images of the area, and I do see a small pond formation a small distance from his house. Maybe he went swimming. As he said this, I could hear that he wanted to laugh. Look man, I know this sounds crazy, but there's a whole bunch of creepy ass stuff going on around here. The guy looks terrifying. The house is all messed up, for an almost 70-year-old TV and a ratty ass rocking chair, and not to mention the painting, I replied, hearing my own frustration in my own voice. Painting, Jack said, either moved by everything that I said, or trying to avoid a confrontation with a crazy person. I couldn't tell, but he definitely sounded less lighthearted. After he asked this, I gave him a brief description of the picture that I saw, what the guy looked like, and even the whole area itself, and for a fleeting moment, he was silent. I'm not sure how to tell you this, but as long as he isn't a danger to you, or under the influence of alcohol, you're gonna need the paperwork signed, Jack stated. But to me that would be crazy. This whole situation sounds crazier than a group of shithouse rats, and I think you should just call it a day. I mean, I wouldn't want to be there, and I'm sure your company will let it slide if you said you felt uncomfortable. I like this guy. He didn't just state the guidelines and hang up. He reacted in a logical manner, and he also said something a non-office robot would say. Never thought I would meet a company man who thinks like an actual person. I would say that solution would cover the rest of my problems, but I got another issue. My 2 front tires are blown, and I only got 1 spare, I said, hearing the defeat in my own voice. Don't worry about it, man. I'll contact the local As Jack was about to offer me my salvation from this mess, I heard the high-pitched scream of a woman coming from out in the forest. The last time I heard a scream like that was some person in Afghanistan. Bobby, you alright? What was that? I could hear Jack, but my senses were dialed up to 10, and I could feel goose flesh forming on my skin. Bobby, did you hear me? What the fuck was that? Jack said again, but this time I answered. Some lady screaming bloody murder, towards the same area where that psycho walked to, I whispered, trying to keep myself unnoticeable. Jack, my mind's telling me to run down this driveway and don't look back. But if I leave some woman out here to some horrible fate, I would hate myself for it. Bobby, everything about this place sounds horrifying, but there had to be a neighbor or some. I cut Jack short. Man, you got the images from the satellite. There ain't a single fucking person around except for crazy eyes out there. He had an upstairs, could have been keeping a chick up there for all we know. And the minute I left, he grabbed her and took her to the woods too. I couldn't finish the sentence. I was already all nerves and thinking of someone getting killed. I think I need to go out there. I couldn't hear Jack on the other end. He was thinking about what I just said. If you're dead set on wandering off into the woods and confronting whatever's out there, go grab your Bluetooth and bring me along for the ride. I'll try to call the local PD on the other line, Jack said. I honestly thought he was going to try to stop me. Alright Jack, let me just get some stuff from my truck, I responded, thankful I wouldn't be fully alone. I made my way again to my truck and reached under the seat to grab my piece. I put the gun in the front seat and put my Bluetooth in my ear. Jack, can you hear me? I asked. Those Bluetooth pieces were not the best, and I didn't want to lose my only companion. Yeah, I got you. Are you sure you want to do this? Some poor lady might be getting hurt out there. It's my civic fucking duty, I said, trying my best not to reveal how terrified I was. I grabbed the magazine from the toolbox and started pushing 40 caliber rounds into it. I slammed that bad boy into the pistol and pulled the slide back with a click. You have a gun, Jack said. You bet your sweet ass I do. I'm in Arkansas, and we actually have the right to defend ourselves out here. I'm not judging, just glad you have some protection. I mean, the SOP dictates I have you fire, but the situation seems to call for a gun. Thanks, Jack. A smile formed on my face as a question came to my mind. Hey, Jack. Yeah? Are you in a cubicle right now? I asked, thinking of the irony of a guy wrapped up in his pre-death coffin, listening to me embark on some adventure, or quite possibly, my death. Is that really what you're gonna ask me? Not like, hey Jack, can you call the cops? Or, hey Jack, can you convince me not to walk into the scary woods towards a screaming person? Or, why are you condoning this, Jack? He said, sounding a bit exasperated. Let me answer the last. I spent 8 years in the army, and my old lady wanted me to take a desk job when we had a kid. Now I'm stuck rotting away in a desk, hoping for just a taste of something interesting. I fell for the guy. I mean, I'd rather be in a temperature-controlled office building, not even worry about monsters or whatever the fuck was out there. But still, I would much rather die than have to make small talk with a bunch of office drones every day. So I guess I was on the fence about who was in the worst situation. Oh, and no, I'm actually in management. I just took over for one of my guys who was sick. So I'm not in a cubicle, you prick. I'm in my own office. I have a window, Jack said. I couldn't help but laugh a little bit. It looks like this guy got screwed by a call out too. The walk from my truck to the edge of the forest was less than a football field, but every step felt like a mile. I could feel my heart beating in my throat and my stomach was turning to knots. The sweat on my forehead started to drip into my eyes as I made my way towards the tree line. I decided that maybe talking while I still could would help some of the fear that was building up. I wiped the sweat away from my eyes as I said the first thing that came to my mind. Hey Jack, so what you do in the army? I heard a sigh on the other end of the line, and then, after OCS, I went straight to job training in civil affairs, then airborne, then air assault, and lastly ranger school. After 4 years I made captain, went to PSYOPs and transferred over to 1st Special Forces Command. Another strange question to ask at a time like this, Bobby. The first part sounded rehearsed. He was probably used to being asked. Just trying to build up some courage here. In PSYOPs, huh? Passing out flyers or doing some shady shit? I asked, hoping I didn't sound too judgmental. He then stated, shady shit. All my experiences with anyone, even support personnel, in special forces was generally negative. They were always trying to be mysterious and act like whatever they did was secretive. In reality, there was most likely a 23-year-old NSA intern with a pimple face and thick rimmed glasses that had more security clearance than these super soldiers. But I like Jack, and I know PSYOPs guys probably do some weird shit, besides yelling at Taliban on a loudspeaker, so I was gonna give him the benefit of a doubt. But I definitely passed out my fair share of flyers on my first tour with PSYOPs. You seem to know a thing or two about the military. Did you serve? Yeah man, the Marines, I said. I heard another sigh, and Jack stated, well, if you survive, I'll buy you dinner. I let out a laugh. Some of the fear did die down, but I had just reached the edge of the forest, and the humor that I felt moments ago disappeared, and was replaced by that stomach-knotting fear. Alright Jack, I just made it to the... Again, another ear-piercing scream came from further into the woods, but unlike the last, this one didn't finish. It seemed to be cut off at the last second. It was go time, and I started running full tilt into the unknown. Bobby, quit running. Whatever is out there is gonna hear you coming. And besides, whoever was screaming doesn't sound like they made it. Jack whispered in my ear, See, that's the difference between a guy like me and a guy like Jack. I think differently than short term. Jack, obviously a strategy thinker, decided that there was no point risking me or the chance to stop whatever was out there for someone who was most likely dead. I don't hear you slowing down, Bobby. Yeah, that's because I'm a crayon eating marine and I want to kick some. Another scream. I heeded Jack's advice and slowed my sprint to a walk. I got down and started low crawling to where I thought the screams came from. As I got closer, I could feel the roots and sticks making small cuts on my stomach. It was almost like this whole forest floor had turned against me. But the pain subsided when I smelled something familiar. Rusted copper. Blood. I saw a big tree in my path and could make out a clearing beyond its massive base. I inched behind the tree and took a quick glance into the clearing, and I felt a whole bunch of bile reach the back of my throat. Mr. Vitter had his back to me as he was lifting up an axe and bringing it down on the body of a dead woman. He kept bringing the axe down over and over again on this lady, blood misting everywhere. About 3 feet away from her body, it looked as if her stomach was torn out and all of her insides were spilled onto the ground. It was a huge mess of kidneys and other organs, all leaking blood and other fluids. The smell of the blood, half-digested food, and everything else filled the air. It was so strong I felt as if I could almost taste it. Jack, I whispered as quietly as I could into the Bluetooth. This guy disemboweled the chick and is chopping her to pieces. Jack didn't respond for what felt like 10 years, until I heard a quiet munching. Sorry, didn't catch that, got bored waiting on grabbed a snack. Snickers really do help hunger pains, you know? Jack, fuck. I'm out here watching some woman get butchered by a psychopath, and you're eating a damn Snickers. Trying to keep my hardest to keep the psychopath unaware of my presence. Sorry, Bobby. You weren't saying much and I needed a snack. You're still alive, so nothing too crazy happened, Jack stated, avoiding the topic of this whole show in front of me. He then continued, also, I think I'm onto something. I did some research while you were fucking around in the woods, and I think I may know what you're dealing with, but you ain't gonna like it, brother. I was getting impatient and trying not to retaste my daily egg McMuffin, so I said as quietly as I could while expressing being annoyed. Just tell me. I doubt I can be more creeped out than what I already am. Well, between the tree, the mountains, and Mr. Tall, Dark, and Terrifying, I think you're dealing with the evil Danish god of the forest, Jack said, without any sort of humor. What the fuck are you talking about? I asked, and possibly a bit too loud, because the psychopath suddenly stopped hacking away. Oh shit, this is it. This is how I fucking die, I thought. But the footsteps and sudden death never came, and the hacking resumed. Jack then spoke up. That was a close one. So anywho, I'll explain what I found. I went into some weird Google search engine about cults. But basically you type in a description of a monster, or whatever shit you're dealing with, and it tells you exactly what it is. And I'm pretty positive from what you told me, that you're dealing with a Danish forest god, who happens to be an evil prick. Like, super evil. He requires pieces of 1,000 bodies to build his army of humanoid tree monsters. So for example, if you were to dig up those little mounds you saw, you would be finding fingers, toes, ears, and other human parts used as the seeds to grow his forest friends. As Jack was speaking, I poked at a mound near my foot. As I did, the loose pile of dirt revealed a piece of a human ear, or tongue, or something. I don't fucking know. I'm not a doctor. Jack continued. Next up is what he looks like. See, his body isn't a tree, but it's a tree with a face, screaming his commands and looking to the heavens. And yeah, there's severed heads on the tips of its branches that spout blood to help his tree babies grow. Does any of this sound familiar? Jack stated, sounding almost amused. I whisper out loud. So Vader is some sort of nut serial killer trying to complete his masterpiece of a god he worships? After asking, I took another peek beyond the tree and saw him bend over and pick up the lady's head. He then walked over to the other side of the clearing and pulled out a massive ladder, while balancing the blood-soaked head under his arm. Every time I looked out from my little cover, It seemed as if there was more and more blood. I would say it was just from that chick's cut open body, but it seemed as if the whole clearing was covered in fresh, undisturbed pools of blood. And that's when I realized that I had hidden behind the wrong fucking tree. I looked up and saw the backs of hundreds of severed heads. If I didn't see that painting, I would have thought that they looked like coconuts, but I knew better. And to make sure that what I was seeing was real, a huge glob of blood spewed out of one of the heads and landed in the clearing. So here I was in the middle of the Ozarks, leaning against some crazy fucking forgotten god with a psycho no more than 15 feet away from me, playing around with somebody's head. This is within the top 5 of the worst situations I ever been in. Jack then spoke up on the headset. Hey, so here's something else in case your day wasn't already ruined. Apparently, Bearstook, that's the god, has a sidekick that he grants immortality for their service. The servant is described as being of great height, little girth, and eyes as black as coal. Does that describe Mr. Vitter? I then took a glimpse into the clearing, and Mr. Vitter was failing at his balancing act and trying with great intensity to hold on to the ladder and to the head. I took his moment of distraction and slowly made my way back towards where I came from to get to a safer point. And Jack, I made it back about 20 yards. Can you do me a favor and call the police? I don't think I can do much for that lady, I whisper, still trying to keep quiet. Yeah, let me just ruin your day a little bit more. I have tried about 5 times. Each time I try reaching the town that you're in, the call goes dead. I tried calling the police out here to see if they could do anything. They laughed and told me that they can't do much for somebody in the middle of the Ozarks. I think you may be on your own. Well, except for me, buddy. If it's any consolation and you get killed by a crazy devil worshipper or his pet tree god, I will avenge you. Okay, Jack was either the most calm dude on the planet, or he was truly enjoying all of this. So what the hell should I do, Jack? And why the fuck are you so calm? Jack took a deep breath and spoke calmly, put 2 rounds in his chest and 1 in his head. I highly doubt that this guy, or that tree of his, are actually anything supernatural. Just a nutjob who's obsessed with Danish folklore. And to answer your question, I spent a large amount of my life fighting some of the most violent, despicable terrorists on the planet. Some lady getting her guts spilled out, and a skinny weirdo serial killer cutting people's heads off isn't too far from the shit that I seen. Damn, this dude is tough, I thought. Probably the best dispatcher I could have had today. I then asked, okay, but what if they are, supernatural? And once again in that cold voice, Jack spoke up. Per the article on these guys, you will need to set aflame the old god Bearstook, and the servant will again be mortal. So set Bearstook on fire before he comes alive, and then shoot Mr. Vitter. Easy peasy. I bet this army man wouldn't be so tough if he was the one facing this thing alone. But he sounds pretty confident. I gotta have some faith, I thought. I closed my eyes and kept my back to my new cover. Are you gonna do this, kid? Just go up there. Tell him to freeze. Put a few rounds in him. And when the cops finally show up, just say that he charged at you. By the way, I should mention, this call isn't being recorded, and you shouldn't mention parts of this conversation happening, Jack said. Okay, I'm ready to put this asshole down and get the hell out of here, I said, hoping I sounded less terrified than I felt. You got this, buddy, Jack said, trying to motivate me. I started going back towards the clearing. As I got closer, I could see Mr. Vitter on his ladder, fumbling to place the head on top of a branch. If it wasn't so horrifying to look at, you would think he was a normal guy, just messing around in the backyard, not a psychopath hanging parts of dead bodies. I gathered up what was of my shot nerves and yelled, "Hey, dickbag!" Mr. Vitter turned his head towards me as I snuck up behind him. Get down off the ladder, slowly. Once you hit the ground, turn around and put your hands up. I felt and sounded like a testosterone-fueled policeman. It was almost as cool as being a testosterone-fueled Marine. But instead of listening to me, Mr. Vitter hopped down off the top of the ladder and turned to face me. With an evil smirk, he said, "Is my TV ready, cable boy?" He laughed at my perplexed look. "What, you think I should fear you and your mortal weapons?" As he was speaking, he He started walking towards me with the axe that was resting between us. Lord Bearstook granted me the gift of life as long as I facilitated his rebirth into our world and assisted him in becoming the ruler of the forest once more. He was no less than 5 feet from the axe when I yelled, "I'm warning you, don't take one more step. I will fucking spray your goddamn tree puppet with your fucking brain matter." In my ear, Jack shouted, "Nice line. Where'd you hear that from? A movie?" Ignoring the cycle in my ear canal and keeping focus on the cycle reaching for the axe in front of me, I took a few steps back so to avoid any axe swings if Mr. Vader reached for it. "You're a fool, boy. I've been rebuilding the Garden of Bearstook for over a century. Many mortals have tried to stop me, but their bodies and their glorious lifeblood belong to my Lord, and soon Bearstook's revival will be completed. But you will never bask in the glory of my Lord, for I shall bring down his justice and let his children bathe in your blood." As he said this, he ran towards me, reaching for the axe. I warned him not to move, but he made his choice. I felt the welcome feeling of the gun recoiling in my hand and the vibrations that it sent up my arm. My aim was a bit off, but all 3 rounds found a home. The first 2 ripped into his stomach, filling the already stinking clearing with the smell of rotted meat. The dirt snapped his head back as it buried its way between those black-ass night eyes, fulfilling my promise of spraying his precious tree with its brain matter and skull fragments. Mr. Vader then crumbled in a heap on the ground, adjacent to the leftover pieces of the girl that he had killed earlier. I then heard a crackling on the Bluetooth. "Is he dead?" Jack was asking. I started walking over to make sure that I was going to face manslaughter charges in my near future. I was just a foot away when Mr. Vader's hand bolted out and grabbed my ankle. Pain then shot up my leg, his grip like a bear trap. I then put 2 more rounds in his skull, which caused his head to once again violently flail backwards, smashing into the ground, but his fucking hand stood strong. I reached down and grabbed the axe and took a powerful downward swing, severing his bony arm and releasing the pressure on my ankle. I'm not sure if it was the adrenaline or the fear, but one thing I finally noticed was that he wasn't bleeding. 5 bullets and a detached hand, but barely any blood, just a small trickle from the axe wound. I swear I saw brain and skull fly out when I popped him in the head. "Jack, he's not fucking bleeding. I put 5 fucking rounds in his asshole and chopped off his hand. Just a few drops," I said desperately. "From what I can read, the servant will drain all his blood to feed the early parts of Bearstook's development. I think this might be the real thing." As Jack spoke the last word, Mr. Vader's eyes turned towards me as the holes in his face healed themselves. He let out a guttural laugh and said, "I have already proclaimed. I've been given this gift of eternal life by the great Lord Bearstook, and there's not a single weapon that can hurt me. Do something and get the fuck out of there." Jack yelled through the headset, and he was right. I picked up the axe before Mr. Vader could make a move and brought it down onto his skull, splitting it almost clean in half. I saw what was left of his brain matter spilled out onto the forest. "He shouldn't be getting up from that anytime soon," I said onto the mic. "I cut that fucker's head clean in half. Instead of admiring your morbid handiwork, why don't you get the fuck out of there already?" Jack yelled into my ear. He was right, and I started booking it through the woods, hopefully towards my truck and the large can of gasoline I keep in the bed. Even though I was at most 200 yards away from my truck, my swollen ankle kept me from getting there quickly. Mr. Vader was most likely already healed up and about to feed me to the tree. Lucky for me, I had Jack to help me keep my mind straight as I made my way back to my waiting Ram 1500. When I made it to the yard, I went around the side with the painting and made sure to give Bearstook the bird and said, "I'm gonna fucking burn you down, and all your little tree babies, and your servant Mr. Vitter. I'm gonna gut him slow. Just you wait, bitch." "Bobby, you talking to a painting?" Jack chirped in my ear. "You actually may need some therapy when this is all said and done. Way ahead of you. Apparently, I have PTSD, I responded. "Don't all of us do?" Jack said with a bit of humor in his voice. While we were talking, I made it back to the ram and started sifting through all my junk looking for my gas can. I found it, I said, and my lucky lighter is in the dash. Jack, I may actually not die today. You should set your standards a bit higher, but let's hold off from celebrating until you ice the tree monster and his sidekick, Jack said. Yes, sir, I responded. Slightly annoyed he wouldn't let me have at least a second to chill, but then I grinned to myself as I pulled out the lighter that I had since I was 18. It was the last birthday gift I got from my pops. Alright, Jack, I'm taking the long walk back. Hopefully I don't run into the psycho. If you do, just put a few bullets in him and keep moving, Jack said. Started my way back towards that god-awful scene in the woods, doing my best to remain quiet and unseen. The pain in my ankle went away, or my mind gave up on trying to tell me to lay off of it for a while, so I was able to move a bit quicker. My ultimate goal was to get back there and find Mr. Vitter still split open like a piñata. I made it about 10 feet out when I saw a familiar, semi-nude man standing in the clearing, as if he was waiting for me. I guess no luck on him still spilling my guts on the dirt. Jack, fuckface, is standing again. I'm gonna pop a few more rounds in him. Maybe even hack off one of his feet. Don't waste any time, man. Who knows what time Bearstook is coming back. Put a round in Mr. Vitter's head and set that fucking tree on fire, Jack commanded. He was right. I ran ahead, and before Mr. Vitter could react, I placed another round between that little shit's eyes. He crumpled back to the ground, and just for shits and giggles, I grabbed the axe and swung it right back into his skull. I turned around to face the nightmare tree and try to figure out how to go about burning this monster. Bobby, from what I can tell, all you gotta do is set the trunk on fire. That should take care of it, Jack said from the headset. Also, it says something in the article you should hear. Do not speak to the old god, because he can and will bend you to his purpose. So whatever you do, don't talk to the tree. And that's when I saw this thing's face. It was just like the painting, but more expressive, angrier. I started pouring the gas on the base of the tree trunk, which added another wonderful smell to this already shitty filled clearing. As I poured the last of the gas onto Bearstook, he decided that he was going to speak up.
Hello, Robert. Why do you attack me? Why have you hurt my faithful servant? We mean no harm to you. All we want to do is bless the world with my glory.
I looked at the old god's face while he was talking, but not once did I see his mouth move. It was almost like he was speaking in my mind.
Robert, you have accomplished nothing since leaving your warrior class. I can grant you eternal life, a new woman every day, limitless gold, and power over everybody. Take my root and drink deeply from the life of my blood, and your every desire will be fulfilled.
As he said this, a spigot formed on his trunk, directly in front of my face. Jack, the tree, it's talking, I said. Don't listen, Bobby, Jack yelled from the headset. He doesn't need 2 slaves. Think about it. As Jack was yelling, I felt myself drawn to the spigot-shaped root. Don't become a window licker. For some reason, being accused of licking windows pulled me back to reality, and it was almost too late. Mr. Vitter was sneaking up behind me with the same axe that I split his skull with twice. At the last second, I dodged his swing by jumping backwards into Bearstook. As I dodged the attack, I dropped my lighter into a tangle of Bearstook's roots. I was able to lift up my 40 and pull the trigger 4 times, but only 3 rounds came out the barrel. The last one got jammed in the chamber. I watched as one of the bullets struck right where his heart should be, but this time, he didn't go down. He stumbled slightly and moved closer, laughing the whole time. You fool. Bearstook is close to being completed, and his power has given me great strength. Now be still, and I will end this quick, Mr. Vitter proclaimed. Okay, alright, do me a favor, and just answer 2 questions, and I won't fight no more, I said in my most defeated voice. Mr. Vitter seemed to ignore my request until,
Let him speak, my faithful servant,
Bearstook said.
His weapon has ceased to be useful, and he can do us no harm. His begging for life will amuse me.
I heard in my ear. What are you doing?
Run, he can't be that fast.
Jack begged. Ignoring Jack, I got into my knees and discreetly grabbed my lighter while acting like I was injured.
Look at you, boy, dying on your knees. How pathetic,
Mr. Vitter mocked.
Ask away and be done with it.
I looked at him in his dead eyes and asked, why would you ever let me distract you? As I asked him this question, I hit the starter on the lighter and dove ahead as I felt my ass being scorched from the burning gasoline fumes. An unholy scream erupted in my head, causing my ears to ache and my head to spin.
I will tear you limb from limb. I will come back and take your head as my first.
Bear still couldn't finish his sentence because the flames reached his face. I saw as the bark that was his flesh charred and burned. The whole time he was screaming in my head, I was able to shake off the shock and turn my attention to the psycho. Hopefully he was no longer immortal. He just stood there, staring at his master with tears welling up in his eyes.
Why have you done this? You could have been part of the great Lord Bearstook, but now you have slain him,
Mr. Vader cried.
My last act as his servant will be to avenge him and take the life of...
Before I let this asshole finish his sentence, I unjammed my Glock and shot him in the stomach, just so I would get the chance to watch him die slowly. I looked down at him, and it seemed the spell, or whatever it was, had begun to wear off, because he looked like he was in pain. His intestines were spilling out, and I finally saw the right amount of blood starting to pool in the dirt. In a weak voice, he said,
my whole life, serving my Lord, ended by a low man.
As he spoke, I saw blood trickle out the side of his mouth. I guess a bullet fragment ended up in his lungs. I felt now was the right time to ask my last question, before I forget, and before you die. Why the fuck did you order satellite TV? I asked, hoping that I would find out why I was out here in the first place. Mr. Vader then smiled, a bloody smile, looked me in my eyes, and said softly,
I missed the show, the view. That Raven girl, she's my type.
I thought my opinion of this pathetic shit couldn't get any lower, but when he said the view was the reason my ass was out here, I emptied the rest of my magazine into his skull, spraying his fucking brains for the last time onto the forest floor. Jack, it's over. The tree is burning up. And Mr. Vitter emptied his insides on the ground. If it wasn't for you, buddy, I would have never made it. I'm gonna owe you a drink, brother, I said onto the mic. So an ancient god and his undying servant killed by an out-of-shape former Marine turned cable technician. Who the hell would have thought? Jack said. I'm glad you're okay, buddy, but it looks like the local PD finally noticed. They called me on the other line, and the down chief of police gave me a serious tongue lashing, yelling about the crazy nut that was blasting off rounds in the woods. Fuck, I'm about 85% positive I just saved the world, and I'm most likely gonna be arrested for this murder, I complained. If it makes you feel better, I'll most likely get popped for helping your ass out, so it looks like we'll be going to prison together, Jack said, with a bit of humor. I grunted in response, as I started to hear the distant sirens of the police. Well, at least I won't have to install cable anymore. I never really knew my grandma's brother well. All I can remember is that he was a real energetic man who lived on the hill where my grandparents resided, in the Navajo Res, not far from the Chaco Wash. My grandma's brother used to reside a couple of miles north of my grandparents' place. His dwelling, more like a shack, sat on the outskirts of the Badlands. When we were young, we were instructed to steer clear of this place because it was considered evil. I never questioned why. I just accepted the warning and avoided the area. As time went by, my grandma's brother passed away under strange circumstances. He was found dead in his house
Even though he would occasionally visit my grandparents, his absence for a few days was unusual. My older uncle went to his house and discovered his lifeless body. What was strange was the hasty funeral arrangements that followed. Normally, in Navajo tradition, funerals are held on the fourth day after the person's passing, but in this case, the funeral was conducted immediately, without even informing the family. Curiosity led me to sneak over to his house to see what it looked like inside before it was torn down, as per my grandmother's request. The inside of the house felt eerie. It was a one-room, shed-like structure with faded and sun-bleached wooden boards for walls. The boards didn't fit tightly, allowing sunlight to filter in, illuminating the floating dust particles. The bed was modest, adorned with a green army blanket. There weren't that many decorations, mostly old shearing tools and knives, with no photographs in sight. An old wood stove and a small table occupied the space, alongside two crates at the far end of the room. One wooden crate laid open, revealing its contents, while the other, made of metal, was locked. After my brief exploration, I left the house, noting its vantage point, overlooking the Badlands to the west. Several years passed, and my older uncle decided to build his dream house on the exact site where my grandmother's brother had lived. Despite my grandmother's concerns about the location, my uncle was determined to proceed with the construction. He envisioned a single-story ranch-style house, equipped with all modern stuff, which was actually very rare on the res. The construction began, and everything seemed to progress easy at first. However, strange occurrences soon began to fall on the workers. Tools would go missing, and they said that there would be shadows moving within the house, and blood was discovered smeared on the walls. Even stranger were the tracks found in the sand around the house, leading from the west towards the Badlands. My uncle, an experienced hunter, couldn't identify these tracks, so he looked for help with my grandpa, who also found them perplexing. Eventually, my grandma intervened, recognizing the signs of a skinwalker. She instructed my uncle on the necessary precautions, and work on the house stopped until this issue could be resolved. Despite being careful, strange events continued to happen in the house, but my uncle pressed on. He eventually completed the house, and even yet, the disturbances persisted, driving his family to discomfort and fear. Even my grandmother's attempts to calm the spirits seemed futile against whatever forces were at play. On one specific evening, my cousins and I stayed over, and we experienced firsthand the strange nature of this house. The generator was shut off, and then strange noises echoed through the darkness, and it almost felt like some presence seemed to stalk us from the shadows. Only the intervention of my grandparents, armed with traditional remedies and fierce determination, brought us relief from all of this. Another incident involved my younger cousin. She was alone in the truck outside, and she said as she looked to the west side of the house, she saw a pale, humanoid figure peering down at her with dark, soulless eyes. Her screaming alerted the family to come outside, but this creature had vanished before they could confront it. Even with my grandmother, a woman of great strength, she had vowed to confront whatever was there and expel it from the house. My grandma was very traditional and practiced native medicine. She also used sacred crystals to find and heal people. While looking into her crystals, she would also practice reading people's hands. There's been a few instances where she has been used to locate missing people, and also found the circumstances of the way the person died. She also had knowledge of the evil way, the dark practice of witchcraft. In native medicine, my grandma had acquired a few secret items and would seek help from another medicine man. They both went into the house and began a ceremony to expel whatever was in it. They went into each room, blessing them with sage and sealing them with ash. When they finally went into the master bedroom, the medicine man started to vomit and bleed from the nose. My grandma said that she had a nauseous feeling and felt dizzy, almost fainting. They both retreated from the room and closed the door, sealing it with ash. The medicine man said the room was the source of evil, attracting evil spirits, including skinwalkers. He said he would try to pinpoint where the evil was coming from, but would need to go in alone. He began by lighting up a medicine bundle, taking bitter root, and marking his forehead with ash before entering the room. He described the room as very cold, feeling the presence of numerous spirits in the closet. Upon opening the closet, he saw a black mist on the floor, swirling like the eye of a black hurricane. He began the ceremony to close the portal, but was met with resistance. The medicine man heard a voice from the swirling mass, telling him that only the one who summoned the evil could close the portal. However, he continued the ceremony, and the mass started to diminish and eventually disappeared. Blessing the room with sage and corn pollen, he attached the burnt log to the top of the interior of the closet and sealed the door with ash. He warned my grandma that whatever was summoned was evil and too strong to keep under control, and so his recommendation was that my uncle abandon the house. Despite the warnings, my aunt, her boyfriend, and their 3-year-old son moved into the house, believing it to be a perfectly good place to save money on rent payments. However, they soon encountered paranormal experiences. One evening, my aunt heard footsteps walking down the hallway, followed by something crawling into bed with her and her son. Whatever it was, quickly got out of bed, threw off the covers, and stepped on her boyfriend's neck, causing him to choke for air. They then decided to leave the house immediately, leaving their belongings behind. Later, my younger uncle Max and his friend Leo decided to spend the night at the house to investigate. While they were there, they experienced a terrifying encounter with different spirits, including that of a little girl and a faceless figure, making them flee the house in fear. Even after these encounters, the house has remained vacant, with strange occurrences continuing to happen, such as lights turning on despite the lack of electricity. Despite the warnings and strange events, the house stands abandoned, with its curtains drawing open, as if someone is still inside, watching.